32-year-old bachelor Jason Witt appeared to have it all.
I had just finished up my MBA. I had just landed a job with a very good IT consulting firm and was doing really well. I was traveling almost every other week.
But by the summer of 2005, Jason realized one thing was missing: love.
I had come to this realization that I had probably dated a few girls in my past that I could have made a wonderful life with. My own level of commitment didn't allow that relationship to move forward.
He would talk about, what can I do better? How can he make himself a good match for someone?
As Jason plunged back into the dating scene, he was determined to get it right. That August, he joined an online dating site and quickly came across the profile of an attractive 24-year-old medical technician named Andrea Stanley.
Just shot her a quick note just to say, "Hi, how are you? I'm Jason." And got a response pretty quick.
The conversations that followed revealed clear chemistry.
Andrea had a very engaging writing style. She made me laugh from the get-go. We had an easy time bantering back and forth, so it was enjoyable just talking to her, even though I hadn't heard her voice.
Despite Jason's initial excitement, he did have one concern.
I had never dated someone with a child. Knowing she had a daughter, I had some questions. I didn't know what that meant in terms of any custody issues.
But Jason didn't have to worry about the father at all. On their first in-person date a few weeks later, Andrea opened up about her past.
There was an ease to our conversation that was really nice and refreshing. So I asked her, "Where's the father?" And her response to me was, "I was raped."
He's in jail and he's not a part of her life.
When I heard her say that then, it came out so strong, like such a survivor. It was really impressive.
As the date wrapped up, Jason knew one thing was certain.
There's no doubt it was a great date, and I definitely wanted to see her again.
As 2005 came to a close, their relationship continued to blossom.
We were just kind of taking the natural steps that you'd expect in any serious relationship.
We couldn't be happier.
Me too.
They got along well. She shared his sense of humor. They enjoyed each other's company. That did give me the feeling that they were right for each other.
Then one night in February 2006, Andrea delivered some unexpected news.
There was an uncomfortable silence, and she simply said, "I have something to say." She seemed scared to tell me, and she said,
I'm pregnant.
I was obviously surprised, and I didn't want to make any decisions quickly.
It'll be fine.
But soon it became clear that Andrea wanted answers.
After probably a week and a half, she started asking me questions.
What's up, Jason? It's been 2 weeks.
I said, "I am committed to you. I love you. We will have this baby together. Let's see how you and I do, and then we can make decisions that will impact this child long term."
Just one step at a time.
Her response was, either we're getting married or we're not. Getting married when she was showing was not an option. Here was that moment to say yes or no. The decision came down to, yes, I'm in love with her, so I want to marry her.
Jason knew in his heart he was making the right decision. But before Jason could even pop the question, he would be thrown into a vortex of lies, deceit, and manipulation that would destroy everything he believed in.
He was just caught in this whirlwind of emotion.
I can't imagine how someone can keep such a deep, dark secret.
I didn't know what to do, and that's what just scared the dickens out of me.
In April 2006, Jason Witt couldn't be happier to be in love with Andrea Stanley, the future mother of his first child. But that joy was soon shattered when Jason received a distressing call from Andrea while on the road.
She was distraught, she was upset, and she's just, "I don't know what's going on."
I lost the baby.
It was devastating.
And that just made me worried for her.
Still, Jason knew what he wanted to do for the woman he loved.
I knew I still felt the way I did about her. I still loved her. I created a get-well bag. At the bottom was a diamond ring she says she had always hoped for.
It's my ring.
Will you marry me?
It was kind of a neat moment to recommit to the two of us.
With the ring on her finger, Andrea quickly bounced back and set a whirlwind date for 2 months later. But by the day of their nuptials, it seemed Andrea had morphed into a classic bridezilla.
She was texting me all kinds of things. She was going to leave me at the altar, and I was a horrible person, and I just didn't know what to do. I felt that she had been under a tremendous amount of stress. She was coming off losing a baby, so I gave her the benefit of the doubt.
I tried to just be positive for Jason and, look forward to a beautiful wedding that day. And fingers crossed that Andrea was actually going to show up.
In the end, Andrea did show up, and the wedding went off without a hitch. But over the next few months, it seemed to Jason that Andrea had a flair for the dramatic.
We had some ups and downs, which I felt was normal. What made me a little bit nervous was one fight in particular. She was just off the roof, angry, and within minutes, turned around like nothing had just happened. It was a real Jekyll and Hyde moment.
Then one night in January 2007, Andrea reached a new low.
Why didn't you respond to my text messages?
I had no idea what was going on. So I started questioning her, why are we always fighting? Where is this coming from? And Andrea started describing her depression.
Jason, I just want to die.
I was concerned that she was suffering, having lost a child. I wanted to get her help.
I just want to kill myself.
Jason felt even worse after Andrea revealed that the anniversary of her rape was fast approaching.
We'll get you someone to talk to.
It's too late.
But a few weeks later, Andrea's spirits were lifted.
We find out we were going to have another baby, and we started seeing a doctor, and we knew she was not going to lose the baby. So it really did change the relationship. We were both ecstatic.
Jason was excited to be a father. I could definitely tell that this was something that he always wanted.
By the time she gave birth to their son that November, it seemed Jason and Andrea were finally hitting their stride.
We were both ecstatic. The first time holding my son, it just brought tears to my eyes.
But unfortunately, the upswing didn't last long.
I told you never to do anything like that.
One night,
Andrea got upset at a comment that was made by her daughter.
I didn't do anything!
She was in the kitchen, and I just hear a crash.
Go to your room!
Andrea!
I run over, and then there's just broken glass all over the tile floor. She just had a fit of rage, and she just scared the heck out of me. So I said to her,
Give me our son! Give me our son!
Mom!
It's okay, sweetie. You'll be fine. Give me our son!
she would not hand me the baby.
With no other choice, Jason called the police, which caused Andrea to pack both kids in the car and take off.
At that point, I had no idea what she was capable of.
It was just the tip of the iceberg.
On May 2nd, 2008, Jason Witt called the police after his wife Andrea flew into a terrifying rage and took off with the kids.
I was scared because I had no idea what she was capable of. The cops picked her up a couple miles into the next county.
But Andrea told police she'd merely been taking the children to dinner.
She had kind of charmed herself out of any sort of consequences. I was beginning to learn at this point that she could lie fairly easily, readily, and people were going to believe her. I began to question the reality of the stories that she told me early on in our marriage. And I'd begun to wonder whether or not she had really been raped.
And by December 2008, Jason was even more certain that his instinct was right.
We had an argument.
And Andrea had gone home to her parents, and her mom called me. And so my question to her mom was,
Did she ever get any help after her rape?
her mom's response was, huh? And I said, she was not raped, was she? And her mom's response was, you need to speak to Andrea.
When Andrea finally returned home later that night, Jason did just that.
You need to talk.
She said to me, I was married.
I didn't want you to find out.
She told me that he did rape her, but she told me that he was the son of a prominent person in town. Her parents pressured her into marrying him anyway.
Jason didn't believe a word she said.
The dam broke because everything I believed about this woman was a lie.
But despite it all, Jason wanted to somehow save the marriage. He believed that counseling was the best next step.
I was shocked. I was very vocal with Jason in telling him that she was not going to change. But Jason was committed to the relationship.
Things were good for at least a couple weeks, and she got pregnant again. I was happy, but Andrea can never follow through with counseling. So that was when I realized that I don't have a partner in this. This isn't a marriage if there's only one person fighting for it.
With that, Jason felt there was only one thing to do.
Leaving a pregnant woman was not an easy decision for me at all.
On September 4th, 2009, after 3 years of marriage, Jason filed for divorce. He hoped the worst was behind him, but he was wrong.
The day I filed for divorce was the day I basically set off a nuclear bomb.
After giving birth to a second son, Andrea fought tooth and nail to keep their children from Jason. For over 2 years, a custody battle of epic proportions played out between the two of them.
Jason and Andrea were basically sharing custody. She initiated 6 false allegations of child abuse against him with Child Protective Services, alleging all manner of child abuse. She initiated 2 or 3 police investigations against him as well.
Every month I was dealing with a new accusation. I was dealing with accusations just left and right. This was just a harrowing experience because when you're dealing with children, all she had to do was cry wolf and the courts were going to believe her.
But when all allegations against Jason were proven false, a judge finally held Andrea in contempt and ordered her to allow visitation immediately.
I knew that Andrea was backed into a corner. For the first time, someone of authority had let her know that there were truly consequences to all this stuff that she was doing.
Over the next several weeks, Jason was surprised to hear very little from his ex.
There were no accusations. It was just quiet. And it felt good. It was her weekend to have the kids. So I dropped off the kids with Andrea and I met some friends and we went out and watched the Super Bowl. After getting home, I just went straight to my bedroom and I just crashed.
But around 4 a.m., something stirred him from his sleep.
I remember hearing a shuffle right next to my bed. And I felt a crack right against my head. I can't see, it's dark. I don't know what's going on. And a big pop went off. And at that moment, I knew whoever it was had a gun.
And what he saw next would send his world spiraling out of control.
I was letting out whatever sound I could, and it was just a shriek.
In the early morning hours of February 6th, 2012, Jason Witt found himself under attack.
I knew whoever it was had a gun, so I flipped the light on.
Andrea!
And Andrea is standing there staring me down. My head was racing. I'm just wired at this point, adrenaline just running like crazy.
Turn over.
Andrea grabbed my hands and started to tie them up with plexi ties, and then began to pull the bed sheets off the bed and wrap them around me.
Andrea! No! You're gonna kill me!
I'm not gonna kill you, Jason. I love you. Stop struggling.
I couldn't breathe, and I could feel the plexi cuffs just loosening just that little bit. Eventually, I just pulled my arms out of the plexi cuffs, put a hole through the saran wrap. I started going after her, and the gun goes off. She was trying to shove her way into the room, so I started hitting her over the head with the gun. I shut the door and I locked it and called 911. I told them my ex-wife broke in. She tried to kill me. I need help. I don't know if she's still in the house. I don't know what's going on, but I need help. I need an ambulance and I need police here quick.
As police arrived, Andrea was nowhere to be found, and Jason was rushed to the emergency room. He had no clue until he arrived at the hospital that he'd been shot point blank in the face.
The bullet went through my cheek, under my ear, and out my neck, and didn't hit anything major. It's an absolute miracle.
Meanwhile, police located Andrea at a different hospital almost 4 hours away.
She told sheriff's deputies that she had been a victim of domestic violence, that her husband had beaten her with a gun.
She made claims that it was not her fault and that she was defending herself. Even after committing this horrible attack and then getting arrested at the hospital, Andrea was still lying.
It was shocking to me that she thought anyone would believe it.
Fortunately, all of Andrea's previous actions against Jason spoke volumes.
She was placed under arrest for aggravated assault for causing serious bodily injury with a deadly weapon.
Only a sick person can do this kind of thing. To walk in and torture him. God knows what her plan was. I mean, it's got to be the utmost evil.
On May 14th, 2013, Andrea went to trial, claiming she was a victim of domestic violence. But prosecutors were confident with the trail Andrea herself had left behind.
One of Andrea's boyfriends testified about the things that she had done with him that were very, very similar to what Jason had gone through. There was also evidence from a psychiatrist that she was a habitual liar. There was clear proof that Andrea had a disturbing pattern of terrorizing the men in her life.
I think Andrea is a very miserable, sad, sick individual. And it's just sad that her demons really ran so deep, she couldn't overcome them.
After 2 days of testimony, Andrea Stanley was convicted on all counts and was sentenced to 50 years in prison.
There was just a huge sense of relief. It just felt like 8 years of absolute hell was finally over.
Today, Jason continues to question everything he ever knew about Andrea.
I keep wondering how all this happened.
I mean, there isn't a single word that she ever told me that I can truly rely on as honest truth.
And when he thinks about committing to a relationship, Jason keeps his focus on the people who matter most.
Jason has really stepped up. He is a full-time single dad. I think this has really turned him into a stronger person for the long run.
The boys and I are catching up on what we missed out on. And it's been just unbelievable to watch the kids grow, to have them come out of this situation, especially my oldest. That little kid is my hero. I can't look back on the last couple years of the time I've spent with my boys without anything but complete joy.
After being adopted as a baby, Rachel Shubin felt like she had always been searching for her place in the world.
I always knew I was adopted, so it wasn't shattering, but it wasn't a good childhood. They moved a lot, my adopted family, so I was always the new kid. I felt like I didn't belong.
Rachel dreamed of settling down and having a family of her own someday.
She always wanted a stable family, something that she didn't have when she was growing up.
And in the winter of 1994, while on break from college, a chance meeting in California was about to put 18-year-old Rachel's dream in motion.
I came up to West Sacramento, my hometown, to visit my adopted family. And I went and picked up my mother coffee from the grocery store.
At the cash register, Sergio Alvarez packed up her purchases, and Rachel couldn't help but recognize him from her high school class.
Sergio, right?
Sergio's very, very popular, got along really well with everyone. He was even homecoming king.
Rachel was floored when Sergio followed her out to her car and asked for her number.
So I was super flattered. This good-looking man asked me to go out with him.
A few days later, the two went out for dinner. And afterward, Rachel felt herself being swept off her feet.
We went back to his house, and he played the keyboard for me. Told me he couldn't breathe without me. It was so sweet and romantic.
She found him to be very endearing and big and attractive, and it didn't take them long to fall in love.
Sergio had this giant family. I liked that he had these roots. It was the family that I'd always wanted.
The only thing that seemed off was the way Sergio shied away from intimacy.
Sergio wasn't as affectionate as I thought was normal. I just thought that was his DNA. Everyone's different.
Despite Sergio's lack of affection, Rachel knew she had met the man of her dreams. A few months after they started dating, Rachel dropped out of school and moved in with Sergio in Sacramento.
I felt like maybe because I had had such a rocky childhood that God gave me Sergio. He made Sergio for me.
With marriage in mind, Rachel got a job managing a local gift shop, and the young couple began saving money for their future. But after 2 years, they hit a speed bump when Sergio lost his job at the grocery store for constantly showing up late.
He had started getting write-ups and warnings. And so after 3, they fired him.
It wasn't my fault.
You're right.
But Sergio quickly landed on his feet when one of his friends hooked him up with a job on a ranch for troubled teens.
They needed guidance counselors, men that live there, and give them the rules and to get them used to structure, discipline. He loved that job.
The only problem was that the ranch was in Nevada, 7 hours away.
But he was gone 8 days and home 6 days. And when he's at work, he's not available. I've never minded being alone, but it was hard to be in a relationship with someone far away a lot.
With Sergio gone so much, Rachel became close to a woman who worked nearby named Kate.
She helped Kate out when Kate was working. She would watch Kate's children.
Rachel was eager for Sergio to meet her new friend, so on one of his weeks at home, Rachel invited Kate over for the evening. But later that night, Sergio made a disturbing confession to Rachel.
Sergio tells Rachel that Kate came on to him and tried to kiss him.
She'd made a pass at him, and he had said that she called me a bitch and said,
Why are you with her? You could do so much better.
So I felt super betrayed.
I just can't believe that. That's ridiculous.
But when Rachel confronted her friend, she heard a very different version of the story.
According to Kate, it was the other way around. Sergio tried to unbutton her blouse and tried to go even further.
He came on to me.
Rachel wasn't sure who to believe.
My friends said, she's crazy, she just wants him.
I would have thought, no way, she probably came on to him. Sergio was just an all-around good person.
I ended up leaving Sergio.
But Rachel would soon find out that Sergio was far from the knight in shining armor he pretended to be.
Underneath it all, he was evil.
He was psychologically off.
He threw away a good life to be a monster.
I knew it.
In their 4 years together, Rachel Shubin and Sergio Alvarez had faced their share of challenges. Then, in the fall of 1998, Sergio came home from his job on a ranch in Nevada with more bad news.
What's going on? What happened?
Lost my job.
He said that a boy had made an allegation that he was too rough in one of the restraining moves that they were allowed to make on kids when they became out of hand.
Rachel, it was not my fault, all right?
Sergio was let go, and Rachel decided to just be glad he was home.
I was so relieved that he wasn't going to be gone all the time.
Luckily, someone in Sergio's large network of friends quickly helped him land a new job delivering baked goods in the neighborhood.
And he's coming home at 3 p.m. every day. The job was perfect for that time in our life. I couldn't have been happier.
In the fall of 1999, almost 5 years after they started dating, Sergio and Rachel finally wed. Within a year, the newlyweds welcomed a baby girl, and 2 years later, Rachel was pregnant again with a little boy. Sergio had given Rachel the family she'd always dreamed of.
They seemed very happy. Sergio seemed like a great father. He was always protective, always present.
But when no one was looking, that Sergio vanished.
But he was not attentive. He wasn't responsible. That attitude, it was very hard for me with the kids. They needed a responsible father.
In 2004, Rachel learned she was expecting baby number 3. Although Sergio was rarely around to help out at home, she was happy that he was at least supporting them financially. Until one day that fall, when Sergio told Rachel that his supervisor at the delivery company was unhappy with his performance.
He's being warned. He didn't take it seriously, so they suspended him. And then after careful review, decided not to bring him back.
How many times is this gonna happen?
All Rachel could think about was how they were going to get by. But Sergio had a plan.
Sergio came up with the idea of going into the police academy. He thought he could make a difference in the community. It was something he really wanted to do.
In 2007, Sergio officially became a member of the West Sacramento Police Department. He immediately put in for night patrol.
He liked working the graveyard shift. He liked catching the bad guys.
But working nights didn't ensure that Sergio spent his days with his family.
I started to notice that he was absent a lot more.
Sergio often claimed he was being called in to testify on his cases. And the extra hours were beginning to take their toll.
Rachel, what is this?
He became mean all the time. He'd bait me into arguments. I can't do anything right. It was just impossible to please him.
Rachel felt instinctually that something was off, and one night in March 2010, she discovered why.
A woman messaged me, and I didn't know who this lady was.
The woman claimed that Sergio had been deceiving Rachel, and this time, there was a shocking set of facts that not even Sergio could deny.
I'm devastated because it's true. This is real.
Look me in the eye, Sergio. Is it true?
In 2010, Rachel Alvarez received a shocking message from a woman she'd never met.
Even though I didn't know her, she said that she couldn't stand that I was being subjected to so much behind my back. She had to do the right thing. She said that Sergio was having an affair.
The woman said that Sergio had been romantically involved with one of her friends for over a year.
She had dates and times and situations that she wouldn't know unless what she was telling me were in fact true.
When Rachel confronted Sergio, he reluctantly admitted to the affair.
You're sorry.
My heart was broken.
It's been going on for a year?
He was very remorseful. Said he loved only me. I'm devastated because it's true. This is real.
It'll never happen again.
Rachel struggled with what she should do, eventually deciding to put her family first and believe her husband.
That was her family structure, and that was so very important to her. So she wanted to try to make it work with him.
I wanted to give him the chance. I was willing to work past it. I loved him very much.
So over the next few months, Rachel did her best to put the past behind her and focus on her family.
He did seem to try. So I thought it was on the right track.
But by 2011, after 17 years together, it seemed to get more and more difficult to keep Sergio content, especially in the bedroom.
It seemed for him to get physical satisfaction, he had to be very aggressive. I thought he had like a guilty complex because of the affair. And so this is what it would take for him to be satisfied.
Sergio, hurry.
Rachel justified that as being, this is what my husband needs from me. This is what a wife does for her husband. I said, that doesn't seem normal, doesn't seem right to me.
Rachel did her best to please her husband until September 2012, when Sergio came home with some devastating news.
He opens up his wallet, and there's this groove where your badge goes. And I'm like, where's your badge? And he said, they put me on paid admin leave. A girl made an allegation.
They're accusing me of things that had nothing to do.
Sergio said that a woman he'd encountered on patrol had accused him of forcing himself on her.
Some to the effect that if she didn't grope him, that he would cite her. I'd give her a ticket. He said the Police Officer Association protects their officers from allegations like this because they are normal in this line of work. Why would he force someone to do something? It's very out there.
Rachel was relieved by Sergio's explanation and hoped the incident would be resolved soon. Until Sergio was unexpectedly called into the station.
I'm thinking, oh, is he in trouble? Then my doorbell rings.
Yes.
There were 6 or 7 patrol units in front of my house. I was in shock.
What is going on?
Rachel may have thought her marriage had hit rock bottom, but the real nightmare was only just beginning.
You think you know someone, but you really don't.
He would put that uniform on, and he got carried away with the power.
I think he just snapped.
In September 2012, Rachel Alvarez was horrified as an army of investigators descended on her home.
They had a search warrant with specified items that a judge had signed and given them permission to obtain. I was so terrified.
They took all of their cell phones, their computers, tablets, anything that had any kind of communication technology.
When Sergio returned, he told Rachel the allegations were more serious than he originally thought.
What's going on? What now?
They've taken DNA from him. I did not know what to think. This is all new, scary territory for me.
And after 2 months with no word from investigators, Sergio finally sat Rachel down and showed her something shocking.
It was a link to sex addiction in police officers. He told me I'm a sex addict.
I could be in a lot of trouble.
Sergio admitted he'd had many affairs during their marriage.
There's been a lot of them.
He also told her that the current police investigation hanging over his head was serious.
Please don't leave me.
Rachel was torn.
I loved him. I have a sense of loyalty to him. I don't want to be his wife, but I don't want to turn my back on him either.
Rachel reluctantly agreed to stand by him. And later that night, she tried to learn everything she could about Sergio's addiction.
In doing research to sex addiction, there are links to sexual predators' behavior. And that's when I read My Husband in Black and White.
Something clicked in her head. Looking back, she could see the different traits.
With every word, Rachel's eyes were open to the reality she'd been living in, and she thought back to Sergio's lack of intimacy and aggressiveness in bed.
But I also began to remember the allegations from early in our relationship from Kate.
He came on to me.
And thought there might actually be substance to it. So I started thinking he really was a sexual predator. That's the moment I started fearing him. I knew I needed to get out.
Over the next few months, Rachel quietly formulated a plan. And on January 3rd, 2013, she told Sergio she was taking the children out for the day. But instead, she packed up the car and fled to Florida.
She had to be scared to take her kids, drive all the way across the country. Only fear can drive a woman to do that.
And Rachel escaped not a moment too soon. 2 months later, Sergio was indicted on 35 counts, including aggravated kidnapping, rape, sexual penetration, and oral copulation by use of authority and duress.
A woman came forward and said that she had been picked up by him and felt threatened to the point that she felt she needed to perform sexual favors in exchange for not going to jail.
Eventually, investigators linked him to 5 more victims.
The charges were more than I could wrap my mind around. I was physically ill for 2 weeks.
At his trial in February 2014, Sergio pleaded not guilty, claiming the women's stories couldn't be trusted. But the prosecution argued that Sergio was a sexual predator who used his badge to hunt his victims.
He would check the system for active warrants and pick names of women that he felt he could victimize. He'd take them in his car to some remote locations, wooded lots, back alleys, and they would have sex.
Do me this favor, you won't go to jail.
With DNA and victim testimony, there was no denying the truth.
The physical evidence was overwhelming. I was just in shock.
After 2 weeks of testimony and 9 days of deliberations, Sergio Alvarez was found guilty of 25 felony counts of rape, oral copulation by duress, and aggravated kidnapping. He was sentenced to 205 years in prison.
Sergio put that uniform on and he got carried away with the power that he had and used it against these women.
You can't prepare yourself for the father of your children and the man you give 18 years of your life to be a monster. I think there was something always wrong with Sergio. I think he just snapped.
Today, Rachel's focus is on her children.
Sergio was like a firestorm that destroyed the home I built for my children and the roots that I'd always wanted for them. It's always going to be hard, but my children ground me.
It's a tough road, but she's still standing and she's not going down and she's going to be there for her children.
Rachel is now content to have stepped out of Sergio's shadow and into her own future.
I don't feel sorry for myself. I'm not ashamed of myself. I'm ashamed of him. I'm not going to be a victim. I'm going to be a survivor.
The fog didn't just roll off the Thames that night. It crawled. It was November 1980. London was a city of grit, flickering neon, and the low, persistent hum of a world caught between the decay of the 70s and the cold ambition of the 80s. The air tasted of coal smoke and diesel. It was a night for secrets, a night for disappearances. In the heart of the East End, under the dim, sickly yellow glow of a flickering street lamp, 22-year-old Elena Vance took her last breath as a free woman, or perhaps her last breath alive. She was a nurse, a healer, a girl with a bright smile and a habit of humming jazz tunes when she was nervous. She was waiting for the number 38 bus. The bus came. The doors folded open with a hiss of pneumatic pressure. But Elena never stepped on. The driver saw nothing but the swirling mist. The bench was empty. Her handbag was gone. Her life, as the world knew it, had vanished into the gray. 1 minute, a living, breathing soul with dreams of the Mediterranean. The next, a ghost in the machinery of a metropolis that didn't care. Cold case, a term that would eventually define her legacy. But that night, it was just a silence that screamed. The investigation began not with a bang, but with a growing, gnawing dread. When Elena didn't show up for her shift at St. Jude's, the alarm wasn't tripped immediately. It was the 1980s. People were late. Payphones were broken. But by dawn, the silence had turned into a vacuum. Her apartment on Brick Lane was untouched. A half-eaten apple sat on the table, turning brown. A record player needle scratched rhythmically against the end of a vinyl disc. Thump, hiss, thump, hiss. A heartbeat of a house that had lost its inhabitant. The police arrived with the casual indifference of men who had seen too many runaways. But the atmosphere changed the moment they saw the bus stop. No struggle, no blood, just a single, solitary earring lying in the gutter, glinting like a tear in the mud. It was a pearl, synthetic, cheap, but to the investigators, it was the first sentence in a story that would take 46 years to finish. The headlines the next morning were clinical, yet predatory. Nurse vanishes in London fog. The empty bench. The community didn't just feel fear. They felt a sudden, sharp coldness in their bones. Detective Inspector George Mason was the man handed the file. Mason was a man of whiskey and tired eyes, a veteran of the craze era who thought he'd seen every shade of human depravity. But the Vance case was different. There was a void where the evidence should be. No witnesses. No CCTV. This was a world of grainy film and shadows, not digital eyes. He stood at that bus stop for hours, watching the buses hiss by, trying to feel the vibration of a crime that left no footprint. He interviewed the driver, a man named Arthur, whose hand shook as he lit a cigarette. "I saw her," Arthur whispered. "I saw the yellow coat." I blinked, the fog shifted, and she was gone. It wasn't human, Inspector. It was like the city just swallowed her whole. Mason didn't believe in magic, but he believed in monsters. He knew that someone, somewhere, was watching the headlines and smiling. The yellow coat mystery became a sensation. It sold papers. It fueled pub talk. But it didn't find Elena. Weeks turned into months. The posters of Elena's face, once vibrant and hopeful, began to peel and fade under the relentless London rain. The missing turned into presumed dead. In the whispers of the precinct, Mason's desk was a graveyard of dead ends. He tracked every lead, every crank call from psychics claiming to see her body in the marshes, every tip about a shifty man in a dark sedan. Nothing held water. The forensic technology of 1980 was a blunt instrument. Blood typing was rudimentary. DNA was a term relegated to the backrooms of academic journals, a dream of the future that couldn't help the victims of the present. The case was a jagged puzzle with half the pieces missing and the other half melted away. The public's attention, once a roaring fire, began to flicker and die as new tragedies took the spotlight. A bombing in the West End, a strike in the mines. Elena Vance was becoming a footnote, a ghost haunting the pending drawer of the Metropolitan Police. But the silence in the file was mirrored by the loud, agonizing grief in the Vance household. Her mother, Martha, kept the porch light on for 3,000 nights. She refused to move the half-eaten apple until it was a shriveled, black husk. She became a fixture at the police station, a living reminder of Mason's failure. "Where is my daughter, George?" she would ask, her voice a fragile thread. Mason couldn't look her in the eye. He was a man who dealt in facts, and the fact was that Elena Vance had been erased. The neighborhood changed. The old tenements were torn down. The flickering street lamp was replaced by high-pressure sodium lights that cast a harsh, orange glare. But the shadows in the corner of the street remained just as deep. The 1980s bled into the 90s. The world went digital. The Berlin Wall fell. The internet was born. And in a dusty archive in the basement of New Scotland Yard, File 88B, the Vance disappearance, gathered a thick, suffocating layer of dust. The turn of the millennium brought new eyes, but the same old walls. A cold case unit was formed, a group of young, hungry detectives armed with computers and a belief that science could solve what shoe leather couldn't. They looked at the pearl earring. They looked at the grainy photos of the bus stop. They saw a pattern that Mason had missed, or perhaps a pattern that hadn't existed until time provided the perspective. There had been other girls, not in London, but on the outskirts. Small disappearances that never made the front page. A waitress in Essex, a student in Kent, all vanished near transport hubs, all left behind a single piece of jewelry. The jewelry thief, they called him in the internal memos. But without a body, there was no murder. Without a murder, there was no budget. The case stayed cold, a frozen block of time, until a construction crew in 2024 struck something hard in the soil of a luxury development in Canary Wharf. It wasn't a pipe. It wasn't a stone. It was a suitcase. An old, rusted, metal-rimmed trunk that had been buried 6 feet deep beneath the foundations of what was once a warehouse in 1980. When the forensic team cracked it open, the smell of the past hit them like a physical blow. Inside, preserved by the anaerobic conditions of the clay, was a yellow coat, faded, stained, but unmistakably the color of the sun. And inside the coat, the remains of Elena Vance. The city hadn't swallowed her. A man had. A man who had built the very city that grew over her grave. The discovery sent a shockwave through the Metropolitan Police. The name Elena Vance was whispered again, not as a missing person, but as a victim demanding justice from the grave. The forensics had changed. The blunt instruments of the 80s were now scalpels. They found the DNA. Not much, just a microscopic trace on the collar of the coat, a skin cell, a map of a killer's soul. The lab worked in a frenzy. The DNA was run through databases that didn't exist when Elena disappeared. It didn't match any known criminals. The killer had been careful. He had stayed under the radar. He was a ghost who had lived a full life, while Elena's remained frozen at 22. But then a hit. Not a direct match, but a familial one. A young man in Manchester had uploaded his DNA to a genealogy website to find his Irish roots. He didn't find his ancestors. He found a killer in his bloodline. The match led back to a retired civil engineer named Thomas Cray. No relation to the twins, but just as deadly. He was 82 years old, living in a quiet cottage in the Cotswolds, surrounded by roses and grandchildren. A pillar of the community. A man who had helped design the very bridges and tunnels that defined modern London. He was the man who knew exactly where to bury a suitcase, so it would never be found, or so he thought. The arrest was silent. No sirens, no shouting. Just two detectives walking up a gravel path. When Cray saw them, he didn't run. He didn't cry. He simply put down his gardening shears and looked at the horizon. "I wondered when the fog would clear," he reportedly said. In his basement, they found a collection. Not money, not trophies of gold. They found a small, velvet-lined box. Inside were dozens of earrings. One was a pearl, synthetic, cheap, and missing its partner. The puzzle was finally whole, but the solution brought no joy. It brought a sickening realization of how many years had been stolen. 46 years of birthdays, Christmases, and sunsets that Elena Vance never saw. 46 years of a mother's porch light burning for a daughter who was already under the concrete. The trial was a media circus, a cold case solved headline that shook the nation. But for George Mason, now an old man in a nursing home, it was a hollow victory. He sat in his chair, watching the news, a single tear tracking through the wrinkles of his face. He remembered the smell of the diesel and the damp wool. He remembered the silence of the 38 bus. The case was closed. The monster was behind bars, but the haunting didn't stop. London moved on, its glass towers rising higher, its lights growing brighter, but the shadows of 1980 still linger in the corners of the East End. Elena Vance is no longer a ghost in a file. She is a memory in the soil, a reminder that the past is never truly buried. It's just waiting for the light to hit it. The case is solved, but the chill remains. The clock on the wall of St. Jude's Hospital hummed with an electric, insect-like buzz that seemed to grow louder as the ward quieted down. It was 7:15 p.m. on November 14th, 1980. Inside the break room, the air was thick with the smell of stale instant coffee and the lingering, antiseptic sharp tang of surgical spirit. Elena Vance stood by her locker, the metal door clanging shut with a tinny resonance that echoed the finality of the shift. She wasn't just tired. She was bone-weary, the kind of exhaustion that settles deep in the marrow after 12 hours of tending to the broken and the breathless. She adjusted her yellow coat, the wool scratching slightly against her neck, a sensation she usually found comforting, like a warm embrace against the encroaching chill of the London night. Sarah, her fellow nurse and closest confidant, watched her from the doorway, leaning against the frame with a cigarette unlit in her hand, strictly against protocol but ignored in the fatigue of the evening. "You sure you don't want a lift?" Sarah asked, her voice rasping slightly. "Reese is picking me up. We can drop you at the lane." Elena shook her head, a smile touching her lips, that bright, unguarded smile that would later haunt Sarah's nightmares. "No, the bus is quicker tonight. Besides, I need the air. Clear my head." She needed the air, a simple, innocuous desire that would become the epitaph of her existence. Elena pushed through the heavy double doors of the hospital and stepped out into the night. The transition was jarring. The hospital was a world of stark, fluorescent light and controlled temperatures. The street was a chaotic, sensory assault of damp cold and shadow. The fog was already claiming the city, rolling in off the river in thick, soupy waves that muffled the sound of traffic on Whitechapel Road, turning the headlights of passing black cabs into diffused, ghostly orbs floating in a sea of gray. It wasn't just mist. It was a physical weight, pressing down on the cobbled streets, slicking the pavement with a treacherous sheen of moisture. Elena pulled her collar up, clutching her handbag tighter to her side. The leather strap dug into her shoulder. Inside, her diary, a pack of gum, a few pound notes, and a letter she had started writing to her sister in Birmingham but never finished. Artifacts of a life in motion, soon to be frozen in time. She began the walk to the bus stop on Cambridge Heath Road. It was a route she had walked 100 times, a path worn into her muscle memory. Left at the corner, past the boarded-up newsagent with the graffiti spraying angry slogans about Thatcher and the unions, right by the pub where the smell of stale beer and tobacco smoke spilled out onto the street, and then straight on until the shelter. But tonight, the familiarity felt warped. The shadows seemed to stretch longer, reaching out from the alleyways with grasping fingers. The silence between the passing cars was heavy, pregnant with an unspoken threat. The Yorkshire Ripper was still a name that chilled the blood of every woman in England, even though his hunting grounds were miles north. The fear was a contagion, airborne and pervasive. Every footstep behind you was him. Every shadow was a potential grave. Elena walked faster, the click-clack of her sensible nursing shoes echoing off the wet brickwork like a metronome counting down. She reached the bus stop at 7:28 p.m. We know this because she checked her watch, a small, silver timepiece her father had given her for graduation. A witness, a man walking his dog on the opposite side of the street, saw the gesture. He remembered it later, under the harsh lights of an interrogation room. She looked at her watch, he would say, his voice trembling. She looked impatient. She looked normal. That was the horror of it. The normalcy. There was no cinematic swell of music, no sudden drop in temperature. Just a girl in a yellow coat, waiting for the number 38. The dog walker turned the corner. The street was empty again. The stage was set, but the audience had looked away. At 7:45 p.m., the bus arrived, but Elena was gone. The space she had occupied was reclaimed by the fog. The bench was slick with condensation. The only evidence of her presence was the lingering scent of her perfume, lavender and rain, fading rapidly into the exhaust fumes of the idling bus. The driver, Arthur, waited for 10 seconds. He checked his mirrors. He saw the empty street. He closed the doors and drove on, carrying a busload of tired commuters who had no idea they had just passed through the scene of a crime. 5 miles away, in the cramped, terraced house on Brick Lane, Martha Vance was stirring a pot of stew that had been simmering since noon. The windows were steamed up, shielding the warmth of the kitchen from the bleak night outside. She hummed a tune, glancing at the clock. 7:50 p.m. Elena would be home any minute. The routine was sacred. Elena would walk in, kick off her shoes, complain about the ward sister, and then they would eat. Martha set the table. 2 plates, 2 forks, a slice of bread for each. 8 p.m. came. The stew bubbled, thick and rich. 8:15 p.m. Martha turned the gas down low. A flicker of annoyance crossed her mind. The buses were terrible lately. Strikes, delays, breakdowns. It was always something. She went to the window and wiped a circle in the condensation, peering out into the darkness. Nothing but the orange glow of the street lamp reflecting off the wet pavement. 8:30 p.m. The annoyance began to curdle into worry. It was a subtle shift, a tightening in the chest. Elena wasn't just punctual. She was considerate. She would have called if she were going to be late. There was a payphone in the hospital lobby. There were payphones on the street. Martha walked to the telephone in the hallway, a heavy, black rotary dial device that sat on a lace doily. She picked up the receiver to check for a dial tone, just to make sure the line wasn't down. The hum was steady, mocking in its functionality. She put it back. Ring. She willed it. Just ring. By 9 p.m., the silence in the house was deafening. The record player, which Elena had left on earlier, had reached the end of the side, the needle clicking rhythmically in the run-out groove. Thump, hiss, thump, hiss. It sounded like a heartbeat slowing down. Martha couldn't take it anymore. She dialed the hospital. The night shift receptionist answered, her voice clipped and busy. St. Jude's, please hold. Martha held. Her knuckles were white as she gripped the receiver. Hello? Yes, I'm looking for Nurse Vance. Elena Vance. She should be home by now. The pause on the other end felt like an eternity. The rustling of papers. Elena signed out at 7:15, Mrs. Vance. She left with the others. She's probably just stuck in traffic. The fog is dreadful tonight. Probably just traffic. The words were meant to soothe, but they acted like acid. Martha knew her daughter. She knew the rhythm of her life. Elena didn't get stuck. Elena moved with purpose. Martha hung up and dialed the only other number she knew by heart. Mark, Elena's boyfriend. Mark was a mechanic, a good lad with grease under his fingernails and a soft spot for Elena. He answered on the third ring, his voice groggy, the background noise of a television blaring a sitcom laugh track. "Mrs. Vance? Is everything all right?" When Martha explained, the sleep vanished from his voice. "She's not with me, Martha. We weren't seeing each other tonight. I've been here since 6. My mom can vouch for me." The alibi was instant, reflexive. It wasn't defensive, it was frightened. Mark felt it too. The wrongness. The void where Elena should be. 9:45 p.m. Martha put her coat on. She couldn't sit in the house with the ticking clock and the cooling stew. She grabbed a torch, though the batteries were weak, and stepped out into the Brick Lane fog. She walked the route in reverse. She walked past the curry houses closing up, past the fabric shops with their shutters down. She called Elena's name, her voice sounding small and pathetic against the roar of the city. "Elena! Ellie!" People walked past her, heads down, collars up, ignoring the frantic woman with the torch. This was London. Crazy people shouted in the street every night. "You didn't make eye contact. You kept walking. You survived." Martha reached the bus stop. She shone the weak beam of her torch on the bench. It was empty. She looked at the gutter. She looked at the dark mouth of the alleyway nearby. Nothing. Just the wet leaves and the grime of the city. At 10:30 p.m., Martha walked into the Bethnal Green police station. The station was a hive of chaotic energy. Drunks were being booked, shouting obscenities. A radio squawked dispatch codes. The air smelled of sweat, stale smoke, and indifference. Martha approached the high desk. The sergeant, a man with a face like a bulldog and eyes that had seen too much, didn't look up from his ledger. "Help you, love?" "My daughter," Martha said, her voice trembling but clear. "She's missing." The sergeant sighed, a long, weary exhalation through his nose. He put his pen down. "Missing is she? How long?" "Since 7:15. She left work. She never came home." The sergeant looked at the clock on the wall. 3 hours? That's not missing, love. That's late. Probably stopped for a drink. Met a bloke. Lost track of time. "She doesn't drink," Martha snapped, a flash of anger cutting through the fear. "She doesn't just meet blokes. She's a nurse. She's responsible. Something has happened." The sergeant gave her a look of patronizing pity. He reached for a form, sliding it across the counter with a sluggish reluctance. "Look, Mrs. Vance is it. We can't file a report for 24 hours. She's an adult. 22, you said? They have minds of their own at that age. If she's not back by morning, you come back." But 9 times out of 10, they walk through the door smelling of gin and regret before the sun comes up. "You don't understand," Martha pleaded, gripping the edge of the counter. "She's not like that. You have to look for her. The fog. The Ripper. The Ripper is in Yorkshire," the sergeant said firmly. "Go home, Mrs. Vance. Make a cup of tea. She'll turn up. She'll turn up." The phrase hung in the air. A lie dressed up as comfort. Martha walked out of the station, the form clutched in her hand, uncompleted. The police weren't coming. The cavalry wasn't mounting up. She was alone. She walked back to the empty house, the silence screaming at her. She sat by the window and watched the street. 11 p.m. Midnight. 1 a.m. The streetlights buzzed. The fog thickened. The city slept. But Martha Vance began her vigil. She didn't know it yet, but the clock had started on a 46-year nightmare. The first vital hours, the golden hour of investigation, were slipping away, dissolving like sugar in hot tea, while the sergeant went back to his ledger and Mark paced his living room floor, and the nurses at St. Jude's finished their shift wondering where Elena was. A yellow coat was being shoved into a trunk in the back of a van, miles away, moving deeper into the shadows. The system hadn't just failed Elena Vance. It hadn't even started working yet. But there was one person who wasn't sleeping, one person who had seen something, though he didn't know its significance yet. A young boy, 12 years old, watching from his bedroom window on the 3rd floor of the tenement block, overlooking the bus stop. He was supposed to be asleep, but he was watching the cars, counting the headlights. He had seen the yellow coat, and he had seen the car that pulled up alongside it. A dark saloon, boxy, official-looking. He hadn't seen the face, but he had seen the sticker on the rear bumper. A distinct, reflective shape. He didn't tell his mom. He didn't tell the police. Not then. He just pulled his duvet up and went to sleep. The image filed away in the chaotic library of a child's memory, a clue that would wait decades to be deciphered. The sun rose on November 15th, a pale, watery disk struggling through the smog. It illuminated a city that was exactly the same as the day before, yet fundamentally different. A space had opened up in the fabric of the East End, a void in the shape of a 22-year-old nurse. Martha Vance was still at the window, her eyes dry and red, the half-eaten apple on the table behind her starting to brown. She stood up, her joints stiff, and walked to the phone. She dialed the number again. The police. This time, she wouldn't take no for an answer. This time, she would scream until they listened. The late period was over. The missing era had begun, and the cold, hard reality of the investigation was about to crash into their lives like a tidal wave. The first detective to arrive at the house wasn't Mason. It was a junior constable, sent to placate the hysterical mother. He arrived at 8 a.m., looking fresh-faced and bored. He took notes in a small pad. Height. Weight. What was she wearing? A yellow coat, Martha said, her voice flat. Bright yellow. You can't miss it. Right. The constable said, snapping his notebook shut. We'll put out a bolo. Be on the lookout. But like the Sarge said, don't panic yet. He left. Martha watched his patrol car drive away. She knew he wasn't going to look. She knew she had to do it herself. She went to the drawer, found a photo of Elena, smiling, wearing her nursing cap, and a roll of tape. She walked out the door. She walked to the nearest telephone pole. She taped the photo up, then the next pole, then the next. The sound of the tape ripping, zzz, slap, became the rhythm of her morning. She was building a memorial, a plea, a scream in paper and ink. By noon, the first reporter caught wind of it. Not the big papers, not yet. A local rag, the East London Advertiser. A cub reporter looking for a filler piece saw the woman taping up pictures. He approached her. Missing, love, he asked. Pen hovering. Stolen. Martha corrected him, her eyes locking onto his with a ferocity that made him step back. She didn't go missing. Someone took her. That was the quote. That was the headline that ran on page 6 the next day. Mother claims nurse stolen from street. It was small. It was buried next to an advert for used tires. But it was the spark, the ignition. The story was out of the house and into the world. And somewhere in the city, a man reading the paper over his morning tea paused, his finger tracing the headline, a small, tight smile playing on his lips. He had been noticed, but he hadn't been seen. Not really. The game was afoot, and he was already miles ahead. Detective Inspector George Mason didn't arrive at the Bethnal Green station like a savior. He arrived like a storm. It was November 17th, 3 days since Elena Vance had vanished, and the atmosphere in the precinct had shifted from dismissive to defensive. The local rags headline had touched a nerve, and the higher-ups at New Scotland Yard were starting to ask why a young woman could vanish from a busy bus stop without a single lead. Mason was 48, with a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite and then left out in the rain. He didn't care about headlines, and he certainly didn't care about the sergeant's excuses. He walked into the incident room, slammed his briefcase onto a desk covered in cigarette ash, and demanded the file. When he saw the thin, 3-page report, he threw it back at the duty officer. "This isn't an investigation," he growled, his voice a low, Gravelly rasp. This is a grocery list. Where are the witness statements? Where is the forensic sweep of the stop? Where is the girl? The golden hour hadn't just passed. It had been buried. Mason knew that in a kidnapping or a murder, the first 24 hours were everything. After 72 hours, the trail didn't just go cold. It turned to ice. He spent the first 6 hours of his tenure on the case, doing what should have been done on night one. He hit the pavement. He stood at the bus stop on Cambridge Heath Road, ignoring the biting wind that whipped his trench coat around his knees. He looked at the terrain through a predator's eyes. To his left, a dark alleyway leading to a derelict warehouse district. To his right, a row of shuttered shops. Directly across, the council flats. It was a stage with too many exits and not enough eyes. He looked at the gutter where the synthetic pearl earring had been found, now bagged in evidence, sitting in a locker. It was a tiny, pathetic piece of plastic, but to Mason, it was a scream for help that the previous officers had ignored. He didn't grab her here. Mason muttered to his DS, a young, eager detective named Miller. Too much exposure. Even in the fog, people are around. He lured her, or he had authority. Mason looked at the flats across the street. Check every window. Someone was watching. Someone always watches. Miller nodded, but they both knew the odds. In the East End of 1980, don't get involved was a survival strategy, not just a suggestion. But the breakthrough didn't come from a witness. It came from the physical reality of the bus stop itself. Mason noticed a small, oily smear on the curb, just inches from where Elena would have stood. It was fresh back then, dark, heavy, the kind of grease used in industrial machinery or heavy-duty vehicles. It didn't belong to a bus. Buses leaked oil, but this was concentrated, a stationary leak. A car had idled there for a long time. While Mason worked the street, the forensic lab, primitive as it was, delivered its first blow. The pearl earring hadn't been pulled off. The post was bent, but the backing was missing. It had been stepped on. This suggested a struggle, however brief. Elena Vance hadn't walked away willingly. She had been taken. This changed the charge from missing person to abduction. The incident room expanded. Maps were pinned to the walls. Red string began to spiderweb across the East End. Mason tracked Elena's last steps with a religious fervor, interviewing the staff at St. Jude's again and again. He found the nurse, Sarah. He sat her down in a cramped office, the air thick with the smell of floor wax. She was humming, Sarah whispered, tears tracking through her makeup. That jazz tune. She was happy, Inspector. She was going home to her mum. The investigation then turned its sights on the men in Elena's life. Mark, the boyfriend, was the first under the hot lights. Mason didn't believe in coincidences. A young, pretty girl goes missing. It's usually the one who claims to love her. They spent 12 hours breaking him down. They checked his car, a beat-up Ford Escort. They checked his garage. They checked his fingernails for scratches. Mark was hysterical, his grief raw and jagged, but his alibi held. His mother, a formidable woman who hated the police, stood by him like a sentinel. He was with me, she barked at Mason. We were watching the telly. He's a good lad. He loved that girl. Mason watched him through the two-way mirror. He saw a boy whose world had collapsed, not a killer. He released him. But the suspicion remained a stain that Mark would never truly wash off. Then came the crank calls. Once the national papers picked up the story, the switchboard at Bethnal Green lit up like a Christmas tree. Everyone had seen her. She was in a cafe in Brighton. She was boarding a ferry to France. She was dead in a ditch in Epping Forest. Mason filtered through the madness, looking for the one grain of truth in a desert of lies. One call stood out. It was a man, his voice muffled, possibly by a handkerchief over the mouthpiece. You're looking in the wrong place, the voice said. Check the water. The Thames likes to keep what it's given. The call was traced to a payphone in Wapping. But by the time the patrol car arrived, the receiver was hanging by its cord, swinging in the wind. The whopping caller became a primary lead, a shadow they chased through the docks for weeks, only to realize later it was a cruel prank by a local drunk with a grudge against the Met. By December, the pressure was mounting. The Christmas lights were going up in Oxford Street, but in the Vance household, the darkness was absolute. Martha Vance had stopped eating. She sat by the phone, a ghost in her own home. Mason visited her every Tuesday. He didn't have news, but he felt he owed her his presence. He would sit in the kitchen, drinking the tea she made out of habit, and listen to stories about Elena, the time she saved a bird with a broken wing, the way she practiced her stitches on oranges. "She's still out there, George," Martha would say, her eyes fixed on the door. "I can feel her breathing. It's cold where she is. So cold." Mason would nod, his heart a leaden weight in his chest. He knew the statistics. He knew that with every passing day, the breathing was becoming a fantasy. Then, a lead that felt like a lightning bolt. A witness came forward. Not the boy in the flats, not yet, but a taxi driver who had been near Cambridge Heath Road on the night of the 14th. He remembered a dark car, a big boxy thing, he called it, an Austin Princess or a Rover. It had been parked illegally, half on the pavement near the bus stop. He remembered it because he had to swerve to avoid it. "I saw a man," the driver said, tall, wearing one of those flat caps. He was talking to a girl in a bright coat. It looked like he was showing her something. An ID card, maybe? She didn't look scared. She looked confused. Mason leaned in, his pulse racing. "An ID? You mean like a policeman?" The driver shrugged. "Could have been." She leaned in to look, and then he opened the door. "That's all I saw. I had a fare in the back screaming at me to hurry up." The police impersonator theory took hold. It explained everything. Why she didn't scream. Why there was no struggle at the stop. Why she disappeared in a heartbeat. Mason ordered a review of every officer on duty that night. He checked the logs of every patrol car. He searched for unauthorized stops. He was looking for a wolf in the fold. The atmosphere in the station turned toxic. Men who had worked together for years began looking at each other with narrowed eyes. Who was missing for an hour? Who had a dark Rover? The internal investigation was a meat grinder, but it yielded nothing. Every officer was accounted for. Every car was logged. The official look of the killer was a mask, a brilliant, terrifying ruse that allowed him to operate in plain sight. As the first snow of 1980 began to fall, covering the grime of the East End in a deceptive white shroud, the investigation hit a brick wall. The leads dried up. The whopping caller went silent. The dark Rover was never found. Mason was exhausted, his marriage failing, his health deteriorating from too many cigarettes and not enough sleep. He sat in the incident room on Christmas Eve, the only one left. He looked at the photo of Elena Vance. She was still smiling. She was still 22. He realized then that he wasn't just looking for a killer. He was fighting a city that was designed to hide him. London was too big. The fog was too thick. And the man in the flat cap was too smart. The file was moved from the active desk to the pending shelf in early 1981. It wasn't officially closed, but the resources were diverted. There were riots in Brixton. There were more murders. The world was moving on, leaving Elena Vance behind in the cold. Mason kept a copy of the file in his desk drawer at home. He would open it late at night, staring at the synthetic pearl, wondering what he had missed. He didn't know that the answer was literally beneath his feet, buried in the very foundations of the city he walked every day. He didn't know that the killer wasn't a ghost, but a builder, a man who was, at that very moment, pouring concrete over a metal-rimmed trunk, sealing a secret that would take nearly half a century to scream its way back to the surface. The 1980s did not end with a resolution for the Vance family. They ended with the screech of a heavy metal filing cabinet being pushed into the windowless basement of New Scotland Yard. The vibrant yellow of Elena's coat, once a beacon of hope in 1,000 missing posters, had begun to bleach under the sun and rot under the rain until the images were nothing more than gray, unrecognizable smudges on the brickwork of the East End. By 1985, the Yellow Coat mystery had transitioned from a frantic police priority to a cautionary tale whispered by mothers to daughters. Don't stand alone at the bus stop. Don't trust a man with a badge you don't recognize. Don't let the fog take you. The city was changing. The old docks were being gutted, the jagged cranes being replaced by the skeletal steel of what would become the gleaming towers of Canary Wharf. London was reinventing itself, scrubbing away the soot of the post-war era to make room for the high-finance glitz of the future. But beneath the new concrete, the secrets of 1980 remained, compressed and silent, waiting for a heartbeat that seemed like it would never come. Inside the small house on Brick Lane, time had curdled. Martha Vance no longer cooked stew. The smell of lavender perfume, which she used to spray in Elena's room to keep the memory fresh, had been replaced by the dry, stagnant scent of old paper and unwashed lace. Martha had become a phantom of the neighborhood, a woman who walked the streets at 3 a.m., peering into the windows of late-night diners, searching for a face that would now be 30 years old. She didn't look for a girl anymore. She looked for a woman who might have forgotten who she was. The psychological toll was a slow-motion car crash. Every time a body was found in the Thames, every time a shallow grave was uncovered in a midland forest, Martha's heart would shatter and then reconstruct itself into a shield of denial. It's not her, she would tell the detectives, even before they had a chance to speak. She's coming home. The light is still on. But the light was dimming. The bulb in the porch had flickered out, and for the first time in a decade, Martha didn't have the strength to climb the ladder and change it. George Mason, now a detective chief inspector, found himself increasingly alienated from a police force that was trading leather-bound ledgers for flickering green computer screens. The mid-'80s brought the birth of Holmes, the Home Office large major inquiry system, a digital attempt to link crimes across jurisdictions. Mason spent nights feeding the details of the Vance case into the machine, hoping for a match that never materialized. He was looking for the dark rover, the man in the flat cap, the synthetic pearl, but the machine was only as good as the data provided, and the data from 1980 was a mess of handwritten notes and ignored tips. Mason's obsession had cost him his marriage. His wife had grown tired of the third person in their home, the ghost of a nurse who sat at their dinner table every night. In 1989, the year the wall fell and the world looked toward a new millennium, Mason retired. He didn't receive a gold watch. He received a box of his personal effects and a heavy, illicit photocopy of the Vance file that he smuggled out under his coat. He couldn't leave her in the basement. As the 90s roared in with the thumping bass of rave culture and the arrival of the World Wide Web, the science of death underwent a quiet, seismic revolution. In a laboratory in Leicester, a man named Alec Jeffreys had discovered something called genetic fingerprinting. Suddenly, the microscopic world was no longer a mystery. A drop of blood, a strand of hair, a skin cell. They were no longer just biological waste. They were barcodes of identity. Mason, sitting in his small flat in Bromley, read the journals with a mixture of awe and bitterness. He looked at the evidence list in Elena's file, the synthetic pearl, a single hair found on her locker at the hospital, a smear of oil from the curb. In 1980, these were useless. In 1995, they were potential keys to a kingdom of justice. But there was a problem. The golden hour of 1980 had been so badly botched that the evidence had been stored in paper envelopes in a damp archive. Contamination was the new enemy. The very air of the basement was eating the DNA that could have saved the case. Meanwhile, the man who had closed the metal trunk in 1980 was thriving. Thomas Cray was no longer just a civil engineer. He was a titan of the construction boom. He had played a pivotal role in the Big Bang of the London Docklands. He was a man who understood the alchemy of the city, how to turn mud into gold, and how to turn a grave into a foundation. He stood on the balconies of penthouses he had built, looking out over the Thames, feeling the weight of the city above the secret he had planted. He was a pillar of the community, a donor to police charities, a man who shook hands with the very commissioners who had once ordered the search for Elena Vance. He had perfected the art of the invisible life. He had a wife who adored him, children who excelled in private schools, and a basement workshop where he kept his velvet-lined box of earrings. Each one was a trophy, a frozen moment of power from a night in the fog. He felt untouchable because he was part of the architecture. To find Elena, you would have to tear down the city he had helped create. The late 90s saw the emergence of the first cold case units. Small teams of detectives tasked with looking at old files through the lens of new technology. They were the archaeologists of crime. When they finally pulled File 88B from the depths, they found a document of failure. They saw the ignored witness statement from the taxi driver. They saw the whopping caller notes, but they also saw Mason's meticulous, desperate additions. The case was prioritized for DNA testing in 1998, but the results were a devastating blow. The hair sample was too degraded. The pearl earring yielded nothing but the DNA of the 3 different police officers who had handled it without gloves in 1980. The science was there, but the past was too dirty to speak. The DNA revolution had arrived, but for Elena Vance, the doors remained locked. The case was labeled forensically exhausted. Martha Vance passed away in the winter of 2002. She died in the same chair by the window, where she had sat for 22 years. The neighbors said she simply stopped breathing, as if she had finally run out of the oxygen of hope. She left the house to the state, but in her will, she made one final, heartbreaking request. If she comes back, tell her I waited as long as I could. The house was cleared out. The half-eaten, mummified apple was thrown into a bin. The record player was sold at a flea market. The physical space Elena had occupied was erased, leaving only the yellow coat, legend in the minds of a few aging detectives and the residents of Brick Lane who remembered the girl who hummed jazz. The case wasn't just cold. It was becoming a myth, a piece of London folklore like Jack the Ripper or the Highgate Vampire. But the city is a living thing, and it never stops moving. By 2010, the Docklands were no longer a construction site. They were a global hub. The warehouse where Thomas Cray had once parked his dark Rover was now the site of a multi-billion-pound luxury development project. The ground was being prepared for a new super basement that would house a private cinema and a spa for the ultra-wealthy. The planners talked about regeneration and erasing the scars of the past. They didn't know that the past was about to bite back. Thomas Cray, now in his 70s, watched the news of the development with a cold, creeping dread. He knew exactly where the trunk was. He had calculated the depth, the pressure, the longevity of the metal. He had assumed that no one would ever dig that deep. But the 21st century has a way of digging deeper than anyone expected. The tension of the lost decades was a slow-burning fuse. For 30 years, the case had been a series of no's. No body, no DNA, no witnesses, no hope. But in the background, the world was building a net that Cray couldn't see. The digitization of every record, births, deaths, marriages, building permits, employment histories, was creating a map of human movement that hadn't existed in 1980. The dark car was no longer just a memory. It was a data point in a forgotten insurance claim. The man in the flat cap was a face in a company photo from a defunct construction firm. The shadows were being illuminated by the cold, blue light of the information age. George Mason, now 80 years old and failing, spent his days in a nursing home, staring at the photocopy of the file, his mind a loop of the bus stop on Cambridge Heath Road. He didn't know that 3 miles away, a hydraulic drill was humming, its diamond-tipped bit vibrating against a rusted, metal-rimmed trunk buried 6 feet beneath the clay. The impact happened at 10:14 a.m. on a Tuesday in June 2024. The drill operator felt a shudder, a resistance that didn't feel like stone or soil. He stopped the machine, He climbed down into the pit, expecting to find an old Victorian pipe or a piece of unexploded ordnance from the Blitz. Instead, he saw a glint of metal, a corner of a trunk, the rivets popping under the pressure of the earth. He called his supervisor. The supervisor called the site manager. And for the first time in 46 years, the yellow coat was no longer a ghost story. It was physical matter. The discovery triggered an automatic protocol. Stop work, call the coroner, call the police. When the detectives arrived, they didn't see a luxury development. They saw a crime scene that had been frozen in a time capsule. As the forensic team began the painstaking process of excavating the trunk, the air in London seemed to hold its breath. The news broke within the hour. Remains found at Canary Wharf site. In his nursing home, George Mason saw the headline on the television. He didn't move. He didn't cry. He just felt a sudden, profound warmth, as if the fog that had lived in his chest for 4 decades had finally begun to lift. The missing era was over. The solved era was about to begin. But as the lid of the trunk was pried open, revealing the tattered remains of a sun-yellow coat, the question was no longer where she was. The question was who had put her there, and whether the science of 2024 was strong enough to reach back through the decades and grab him by the throat. The city had kept her secret, but now, the soil was giving her back, and the hunt was no longer for a ghost, but for a man who had forgotten what it felt like to be afraid. The screech of the hydraulic drill gave way to a sudden, heavy silence that seemed to ripple across the construction site. A silence so profound it felt as if the very heartbeat of London had skipped. This wasn't just a discovery. It was an exhumation of a city's conscience. The site manager, a veteran of a dozen urban redevelopments, stood at the edge of the pit, his breath hitching as the forensic archaeologists, modern-day ghost hunters in white Tyvek suits, descended into the mud with brushes and dental picks. They weren't looking for Roman coins or Saxon pottery. They were looking for a girl who had been erased before many of them were even born. The trunk was a rusted, agonizing relic, its metal edges jagged and weeping orange oxidation into the London clay. As they meticulously cleared the soil, the shape of the tragedy emerged. A 1970s-style steamer trunk, the kind used by students and travelers, now serving as a lead-line tomb. The air around the pit grew cold, a localized chill that defied the June sun, as if the 1980 fog had been trapped inside that metal box, waiting for 46 years to be exhaled. The excavation took 12 hours of agonizingly slow movement. Every gram of soil was sifted. Every pebble was cataloged. This was the new forensic era, where the dirt itself could tell a story. When the trunk was finally hoisted from the earth, cradled in a web of nylon slings like a fragile chrysalis, it was transported not to a morgue, but to a high-security biocontainment lab. The world watched through the long lenses of news cameras perched on nearby rooftops. The box in the basement, the headlines called it. Inside the lab, under the shadowless glare of surgical lights, the cold case became a hot scene. The lid didn't open easily. The hinges had fused with time. A final act of resistance from a killer who thought he had outsmarted history. When the pneumatic crowbar finally hissed and the seal broke, the smell that filled the room was a cocktail of damp wool, chemical decay, and the metallic tang of old blood. A sensory bridge across nearly half a century. And then they saw it. A flash of color that shouldn't have been there. A defiant, bruised yellow. The coat. It was tangled amongst the remains, the wool matted and stained with the dark, oily residue of the trunk's interior. But the color, that specific, sun-drenched ochre, was unmistakable. It was the coat from the posters. It was the coat Martha Vance had seen in her dreams every night until her death. Beneath the fabric lay the remains of Elena Vance. She had been folded into the space, a cruel geometry of violence that spoke of a killer who viewed his victims as cargo. But the 21st century was ready for him. The forensic team didn't just see bones. They saw a treasure trove of data. In 1980, the killer's touch was invisible. In 2024, it was a roadmap. They found the trace. It wasn't a pool of blood or a fingerprint. It was a microscopic constellation of epithelial cells trapped in the fibers of the coat's collar. Where a hand had reached out to steady a struggling girl, the DNA extraction was a feat of molecular sorcery. The samples were degraded. The double helix of the killer's identity shattered into a billion jagged pieces by the passage of time and the acidity of the soil. But the lab used a process known as massively parallel sequencing. They didn't just look for a match. They rebuilt the puzzle. They mapped the killer's genome, his eye color, his ancestry, his predisposition for certain traits. He was no longer a man in a flat cap. He was a sequence of letters and numbers, a biological signature that was run against every criminal database in the Western world. The result was a chilling no match. The killer was a clean skin. He had never been arrested. He had never been cautioned. He was a man who had lived a perfectly legal life on the surface, while keeping a graveyard in his foundations. But the net was wider than the police databases. This was the era of investigative genetic genealogy. The detectives turned to the public, not for witnesses, but for their heritage. They uploaded the killer's DNA profile to consumer genealogy sites, the places where millions of people go to find their long-lost cousins or their Viking roots. They weren't looking for him anymore. They were looking for his family. Within 48 hours, the software flagged a second cousin match, a 34-year-old accountant in Manchester named David Cray. David had taken a DNA test as a Christmas gift to find out why his hair was red. He didn't know he was handing over his great-uncle to the hangman of history. The genealogists worked backward, building a family tree that felt like a ladder leading down into hell. They traced the branches, pruning away the dead ends, until they found the trunk of the tree. They found Thomas Cray, born 1942, a civil engineer, a man whose career trajectory perfectly mirrored the construction of the London Docklands. The detectives pulled his old employment records, now digitized and searchable. In November 1980, Cray was a site supervisor for the very warehouse development where the trunk had been found. He had the keys. He had the concrete. He had the dark, boxy Rover, registered in his name, a 1978 model, black with a tan interior. The official look the taxi driver had reported wasn't a disguise. It was his professional aura. He looked like he belonged there because he did. He was the architect of the crime and the architect of the city. As the profile solidified, the detectives realized they weren't looking at a crime of passion. They were looking at a predator who had used the industrial upheaval of the 1980s as a hunting ground. The surveillance on Thomas Cray began on a Tuesday morning. He lived in a house that was a testament to his success, a honey-colored stone cottage in the Cotswolds, surrounded by manicured lawns and the quiet hum of wealth. The detectives watched him through high-powered lenses. He was 82 years old, but he moved with a disciplined, military precision. He tended to his roses. He walked his golden retriever. He played with his grandchildren on the grass, the very picture of a patriarch in his twilight years. To the neighbors, he was Tom, the man who always had a kind word and a donation for the church roof. To the detectives, he was a monster in a cardigan. They watched him handle a garden spade with the same hands that had forced a girl into a trunk. The juxtaposition was sickening. It was a reminder that evil doesn't always look like a shadow in an alleyway. Sometimes, it looks like a grandfather in the sun. The breakthrough for the arrest didn't come from the DNA alone. It came from the box. Not the trunk, but the velvet-lined box in Cray's basement. A undercover team, posing as utility workers, had managed to place a microscopic listening device in his study. They heard him talking to himself. Not confessions, but whispers of nostalgia. He would sit in the dark, the clink of a whiskey glass the only sound, and he would murmur names. Elena, Claire, Susan, the names of the missing. He was reliving the golden age of his depravity. But they needed the physical evidence to bridge the 46-year gap. They needed a direct sample. They got it from a discarded coffee cup Cray left and had been outside a local bakery. The surreptitious sample was rushed to the lab. It was a 100% match. The accountant in Manchester had been right. The blood of the killer was the blood of the engineer. The arrest was choreographed with the precision of a theatrical performance. They didn't want a chase. They wanted a confrontation. On the morning of June 28, 2024, as the mist, ironically, clung to the Cotswold Hills, the convoy of unmarked cars moved in. They blocked the driveway. They surrounded the perimeter. When the lead detective, a woman named Sarah Jenkins, who had been born 3 years after Elena disappeared, knocked on the door, Cray answered in his dressing gown. He looked at the badge, then at the cars, and finally at the horizon. He didn't ask what it was about. He didn't protest his innocence. He simply sighed. A long, weary sound that seemed to exhale the last of the 1980 fog. I always knew the ground was too shallow, he said, his voice a dry, cultured rasp. London grows too fast. You can't keep anything down for long. As he was led away in handcuffs, the house was swarmed by forensic teams. They didn't just find the velvet box. They found a secret room behind a false wall in the cellar. It was a museum of the disappeared. Handbags, ID cards, and the earrings. Dozens of them, pinned to corkboard like butterfly specimens. Among them was the partner to the synthetic pearl found in the Bethnal Green gutter. The evidence was overwhelming, a tidal wave of guilt that crashed over the pillar of the community. But as the news of the arrest broke, the celebration was muted. The discovery of Cray didn't just solve the Vance case. It opened a dozen others. The jewelry thief wasn't a legend. He was a living, breathing record of failure. He had operated for a decade under the noses of a police force that was too busy looking for riots and revolutionaries to notice the engineer burying trunks in the mud. The interrogation was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Cray didn't break. He performed. He spoke about the murders with a detached, technical interest, as if he were describing a bridge project. The 38 bus was the best, he told Jenkins, leaning back in his chair. The women were tired. They were looking for a way home. I just offered them a shortcut. He described the night of November 14th with chilling clarity. He told them how he had shown Elena a fake Public Works ID, told her the bus stop was being moved due to a gas leak, and offered her a lift to the next station. He told them how she had hummed a tune, a jazz tune, right up until the moment he put his hands around her throat. She didn't fight much, he mused. She was just surprised. They always were. They never expect the man in the nice car to be the wolf. The trial was a blur of black and white photos and high-tech DNA charts. The courtroom was packed with the aging relatives of the missing, a gallery of grief that stretched back half a century. When the yellow coat was produced as evidence exhibit A, a collective gasp filled the room. It wasn't just a piece of clothing, it was a shroud. Cray sat in the dock, his face an impassive mask of elderly frailty, but his eyes remained sharp, predatory, watching the families with a flickering, dark amusement. He was found guilty on all counts within 4 hours. The sentence was whole life. He would die in a cell. A fitting end for a man who had made a cell out of a suitcase for a 22-year-old girl. But as the judge passed the sentence, the victory felt hollow. Elena was still dead. Martha was still gone. The 46 years were still stolen. The case was solved. The files were finally marked with a red, closed stamp, but the haunting of London didn't end. The luxury development in Canary Wharf was finished, a glass and steel monolith, where millionaires sleep in beds situated directly above the spot where the trunk was found. They say that on foggy nights, when the Thames air grows thick and the street lamps flicker with that old, sickly yellow glow, you can still hear a faint sound over the hum of the city. It's not the wind. It's not the traffic. It's the sound of a girl humming a jazz tune, a melody that was trapped in the clay for 46 years and now belongs to the air forever. The cold case is over. The monster is in his cage, but the city remembers. London never forgets a secret. It just waits for the right time to tell it. The conviction of Thomas Cray didn't bring the curtain down. It tore the veil off a much larger, more terrifying tapestry of violence. As the gates of Belmarsh Prison slammed shut behind the 82-year-old engineer, a specialized task force, codenamed Operation Yellowstone, moved into his Cotswold cottage with ground-penetrating radar and chemical luminol. They weren't just looking for evidence of Elena Vance. They were looking for the rest of the collection. The jewelry thief was a misnomer. He was a collector of lives, a man who had used his position as a surveyor and architect to map out the perfect places to hide his sins. The basement room, with its corkboard of earrings, was just the beginning. Beneath the floorboards of the garage, they found a second trunk, then a third. By the end of the first week, the tally of suspected victims had risen to 9. The solved headline of the Vance case was rapidly being replaced by something far more sinister. The revelation of Britain's most prolific and most invisible serial killer. The atmosphere in the New Scotland Yard briefing room was one of stunned, heavy disbelief. Detectives who had spent their careers chasing modern cartels and cyber terrorists were suddenly staring at Polaroids from the 1970s and 80s. Girls in bell-bottom jeans, women with feathered hair, all vanishing from bus stops, train stations, and parking lots across the southeast. Cray had been a ghost of the infrastructure. Because he moved between construction sites, his presence was never questioned. A man in a high-vis vest or a tailored suit, carrying a clipboard and a surveyor's level, is invisible to the public. He was the man who belonged everywhere, and therefore was suspected of being nowhere. The realization that he had operated for decades, potentially even continuing his collection into the late 90s, sent a shudder through the national psyche. It wasn't just a cold case solved. It was a systemic failure of the past finally being audited by the technology of the present. As the forensic teams worked, the earring map became the key to unlocking the silence. Each piece of jewelry was a coordinates point in a life. A silver hoop led them to a 1982 disappearance in Reading. A sapphire stud pointed toward a missing student in 1979. The detectives found themselves in a race against time, not to save lives, but to save memories. Many of the victims' parents were already dead, their grief buried with them in unmarked graves of despair. The task force became a bureau of lost souls, calling distant relatives, checking dental records from the era of paper files, and cross-referencing Cray's old work logs with the dates of local disappearances. Every time a match was made, a bell was rung in the precinct, a small, somber ritual for a life finally accounted for. In the midst of this grim harvest, the memory of Elena Vance remained the focal point. She was the one who had finally tripped the wire. She was the one whose yellow coat had refused to fade into the gray of the London clay. The Metropolitan Police, seeking to atone for the blunders of 1980, announced a formal memorial service at St. Jude's Hospital. It wasn't just for Elena, but for all the invisible victims of the Cray era. The community that had once lived in fear of the yellow coat mystery turned out in droves. Old women who had been young nurses, with Elena stood side by side with young officers who hadn't been born when she died. The silence during the minute of reflection was so heavy it felt like a physical weight, a collective holding of breath for the 46 years that had been stolen. But for George Mason, the victory was bittersweet, flavored with the ash of regret. He sat in his nursing home, a guest of honor at a ceremony he was too frail to attend, watching the live stream on a tablet. He saw the photos of the other girls, the ones he hadn't looked for because he had been so blinded by the Vance file. He realized that the police impersonator theory he had chased in 1980 was only half right. Cray didn't have to impersonate authority. He was authority. The system hadn't just failed to catch him, it had facilitated him. Mason turned the tablet off. He didn't need to see the speeches or the flowers. He looked at the photocopy of the file on his nightstand. The edges yellowed like Elena's coat. He had done his job, eventually. The girl was home. But the cost, the decades of silence, the broken families, the lives Cray had lived in the sun while his victims rotted in the dark, was a debt that could never be repaid. The final closure for the Vance family came on a rainy Tuesday in October. Elena's remains were finally released from the forensic lab and laid to rest in the same plot as her mother, Martha. The porch light was finally extinguished, not by despair, but by peace. The grave didn't just hold two women, it held the end of a nightmare. As the priest spoke of light coming out of darkness, a small group of people gathered at the old bus stop on Cambridge Heath Road. It was no longer a place of fear. They didn't bring flowers. They brought a small, brass plaque. It didn't mention the murder. It didn't mention Cray. It simply read, "For Elena Vance, who was humming a jazz tune, the city finally heard you. The investigation into Thomas Cray's other victims continues to this day. The files are no longer cold. They are open. A permanent testament to the fact that time is not a shield for the guilty." The Yellow Coat case changed the way the UK handles disappearances, leading to the creation of a national DNA database for the missing and a renewed focus on the golden hour of investigation. But beyond the policy changes and the forensic breakthroughs, the case remains a haunting reminder of the secrets that lie beneath our feet. London is a city built on layers of history, of industry, and of tragedy. Every glass tower, every luxury flat, every bustling transport hub sits atop the silence of the past. Elena Vance is no longer a ghost, but she is a part of the city's soul, a reminder that the truth, like a yellow coat in the dark, is a color that can never be fully erased. The case is solved. The monster is dead in his cell. But when the fog rolls off the Thames, the city still listens for the hum of a jazz tune, waiting to see what else the soil might give back. The transformation of the Elena Vance case from a dusty archive to a courtroom triumph was not merely a stroke of luck. It was the herald of a new era, where the digital and the biological collide to dismantle the anonymity of the past. As the task force delved deeper into the jewelry thief's history, the investigation transitioned into the world of predictive forensics and algorithmic justice. In the silent, sterile corridors of the National Crime Agency's data lab, the 1980s were being reconstructed in a virtual space. They were no longer looking at grainy photographs. They were using AI-driven photogrammetry to rebuild the 1980 crime scene in 3 dimensions, allowing detectives to walk through the fog of 46 years ago with the clarity of a modern-day witness. They could simulate the light of the street lamps, the density of the mist, and the exact lines of sight from the flats across the street. This wasn't just storytelling. It was a way to verify the fading memories of witnesses who had been silent for decades. The true engine of this revolution, however, was phenotyping. While traditional DNA testing requires a direct match to a person already in a database, DNA phenotyping allows scientists to work in reverse, predicting physical appearance from a genetic sample. By analyzing the microscopic traces found on the yellow coat, the lab didn't just find Thomas Cray's identity. They generated a digital mugshot of what he would have looked like in 1980. The AI predicted his jawline, his eye color, the specific texture of his hair, and even his predisposition for certain facial structures. When this digital reconstruction was placed side by side with Cray's old passport photo, the accuracy was chilling. The man in the flat cap finally had a face, one synthesized from the very cells he had accidentally left behind during a struggle in the dark. This technological leap has opened a Pandora's box of cold cases across the globe. The Vance case became the gold standard for genetic genealogy, a process that is now being automated by AI systems capable of scanning billions of ancestral records in seconds. These systems don't just find cousins. They map out complex social and geographical webs. They identified that Cray's construction projects overlapped with 3 other unsolvable disappearances in the north of England, cases that had never been linked because the jurisdictions didn't share paper files. The AI didn't see boundaries. It saw a pattern of movement, a heat map of a predator's life that spanned 5 decades. The machine was doing what George Mason could only dream of. It was connecting the dots across time and space with mathematical coldness. But as the science advances, It brings a new kind of tension to the survivors. For the families of the other jewelry thief victims, the wait for a match is a digital purgatory. They watch the loading bars on screens, knowing that their closure depends on a distant relative they've never met uploading a kit to a website. The ethics of this DNA dragnet are debated in the hallowed halls of Parliament, but for the detectives on the ground, the moral imperative is clear. The right of a victim to be found outweighs the privacy of a killer's genetic code. The Vance case proved that in the 21st century, the perfect crime is a dying concept. The soil can be dug up, the concrete can be scanned, and the very air can be filtered for the ghosts of the past. The aftermath of the Cray trial has led to the creation of the Vance Protocol, a mandatory rescreening of every unsolved abduction case from 1970 to 1990 using these new tools. It is an industrial-scale audit of human tragedy. In laboratories across the country, ancient evidence bags are being opened. The smell of the 80s, that mix of tobacco and damp paper, is being replaced by the hum of sequencers. We are witnessing the end of the cold case as we know it. We are moving into an age of biological accountability, where the passage of time is no longer a statute of limitations for the truth. Elena Vance's yellow coat was the catalyst, but the fire it started is now consuming the secrets of 1,000 other killers who thought they were safe in the shadows of history. The city of London continues to rise, its skyline a jagged pulse of light and glass, but the foundation of its modern justice system is now built on the lessons learned from a girl at a bus stop. The yellow coat is no longer just evidence. It is a symbol of the persistence of the truth. As the AI systems continue to churn through the data, and the DNA sequencers continue to beep in the dark, the message to those who think they've gotten away with it is louder than ever. The past is never dead. It's not even past. The technology has ensured that every secret has an expiration date, and for the monsters of the 1980s, the clock is finally ticking at a speed they can no longer outrun. The walls of Thomas Cray's interview room were painted a flat, clinical gray, designed to offer no distractions, no comfort, and no escape. But for Cray, the space seemed almost like a gallery. He sat with his hands folded, his posture remarkably straight for a man of 82, watching the detectives not with the eyes of a prisoner, but with the eyes of a master craftsman observing apprentices. To understand how he survived 46 years in the sun, one had to understand the architecture of the double life. Cray wasn't a man who lived in the shadows. He was a man who used the light to blind everyone around him. Psychologists who studied his interrogation tapes noted a phenomenon called compartmentalization of the extreme. He didn't just suppress his crimes. He filed them away in a mental vault, as if they were completed contracts, distinct and separate from the man who walked his dog and kissed his grandchildren. He was a high-functioning organized predator. Unlike the disorganized killers of the era who left chaotic trails of blood and frenzy, Cray viewed murder as a logistical challenge. His background in civil engineering gave him a unique perspective on the city. London was not a home, but a series of volumes and voids. He understood where the blind spots in the urban grid were, where the heavy machinery drowned out screams, and exactly how much concrete was needed to displace a human soul. His psychological profile revealed a profound lack of empathy, a hallmark of the psychopathic spectrum, but it was masked by a mantle of competence. He was so useful to the world, building the docks, the tunnels, the bridges, that the world never stopped to ask what he was doing in his spare time. He played the role of the pillar of society so perfectly that he eventually began to believe the mask himself. The most chilling aspect of Cray's psyche was his relationship with his trophies. The velvet-lined box of earrings wasn't just a collection. It was his anchoring mechanism. Every few months, when the pressure of his perfect life became too great, he would retreat to his basement, open the box, and touch the synthetic pearl or the silver stud. Each item acted as a sensory trigger, a way to re-experience the power he felt at the bus stop or in the warehouse. This is what criminologists call reliving the peak. To Cray, the girls weren't people. They were milestones in a career of dominance. He described the capture of Elena Vance with the same pride a painter might use to describe his masterpiece. The timing had to be precise, he told the profilers, his eyes glinting. The fog was my canvas, but the girl, she was the focal point. Everything else was just background noise. He also benefited from a psychological blind spot in the society of 1980, the authority bias. In that era, a well-dressed man with an official-looking ID and a confident tone was rarely questioned. Cray didn't need to use force to get Elena into his car. He used the social contract. He presented himself as a solution to a problem, a gas leak, a diverted bus, a safety hazard. He hijacked her sense of civic duty and her trust in professionals. This social engineering is what made him so dangerous. He didn't look like a monster. He looked like the man you would ask for directions. He exploited the very fabric of British politeness to lead his victims to their deaths. The perfect life was his ultimate shield. By marrying a woman from a respectable family, by having children who were high achievers, and by staying in the same profession for 40 years, he created a statue of normalcy that was too heavy for anyone to push over. Even when George Mason was knocking on doors in 1980, he never looked at the site supervisors. He was looking for the drifters, the loners, the men with the shifty eyes. Cray, meanwhile, was likely having a pint with the very officers who were searching for his victims, nodding in agreement about how dreadful the world was becoming. He lived in the open because he knew that the best place to hide a leaf is in a forest. But the psychological toll on those he left behind was the inverse of his cold vacuum. While Cray felt nothing, the families of the missing were trapped in a state of ambiguous loss. This is a specific type of trauma where there is no closure, no body, and no funeral. It freezes the grieving process, keeping the survivors in a permanent state of high-alert anxiety. Martha Vance died from a broken heart, but clinically, she died from 40 years of chronic stress and cortisol poisoning, a direct result of the void Cray had created. The architecture of the double life didn't just protect Cray. It actively dismantled the lives of everyone in his orbit, creating a wake of destruction that was as carefully engineered as the buildings he designed. As Cray aged, the compartment walls began to thin. The whispers in his study, the obsession with the earring map, and the subtle slips in his memory were the first cracks in the dam. He was a man out of time, a predator whose hunting style belonged to the analog age, now being hunted by a digital world he didn't fully understand. He thought the concrete was forever, but he forgot that concrete is porous, and so is the human conscience. In the end, his perfect life was his own prison. He spent decades guarding a secret that was slowly rotting him from the inside out, until the day the hydraulic drill finally broke through the surface of his lies. The engineer had built a city, but he had failed to build a heart, and in the cold light of 2024, the world finally saw the hollow space where his soul should have been. The corkboard in Thomas Cray's basement was not merely a collection of trophies. It was a cemetery map pinned in velvet and cork. To the untrained eye, it looked like a display of costume jewelry, cheap baubles from a bygone era, the kind you might find in a charity shop bin. But to the task force of Operation Yellowstone, it was the Rosetta Stone of the UK's Missing Persons Archive. Each earring represented a specific date, a specific location, and a specific void in a family's history. The earring map became the operational center of the investigation, a grid of coordinates that spanned 15 years and 3 counties. The detectives weren't just solving crimes, they were engaging in a massive act of historical reclamation, pulling names out of the darkness where Cray had hidden them. The silence of the basement was replaced by the frantic energy of the identification room, where phones rang with the urgency of a disaster response center, reaching out to the next of kin who had long since stopped waiting for the phone to ring. The first coordinate on the map led them to 1982, to the town of Reading. The earring was a simple, twisted silver hoop, tarnished almost black. It matched a police report filed on a rainy Tuesday in March of that year. The victim was Claire Miller, a 19-year-old literature student at the local university. Claire hadn't vanished from a bus stop. She had vanished from the edge of a construction site where a new library wing was being built. Cray had been the structural engineer on that project. The file noted that Claire was last seen walking home with a bag of books, wearing a distinctive red scarf. For decades, her disappearance was attributed to a runaway theory, the classic dismissal of the era. She was stressed about exams. She had a boyfriend in London. She just left. Her parents went to their graves believing their daughter had chosen to leave them. When the ground-penetrating radar team arrived at the site of the old library, now a sleek, modernized media center, they didn't dig in the foundations. They dug in the ornamental garden that Cray had designed as part of the finishing touches. He had buried her beneath the roses, a cruel aesthetic choice that mirrored his own garden in the Cotswolds. The recovery was surgical. They found the red scarf first. It was synthetic, preserved by the heavy clay soil, a splash of crimson that looked shockingly bright against the gray earth. When they found the matching silver hoop in the soil near her remains, the circle was closed. Claire hadn't run away. She had been intercepted by the man who was building her library. The notification of her surviving brother, now a man in his 60s living in Australia, was a conversation that spanned oceans and decades. She didn't leave us. He wept over the phone. She was there the whole time. The second coordinate pointed to a sapphire stud, fake but sparkling, found in the third row of the velvet box. This led the team to Essex, 1979. The victim was Susan Ash, a 24-year-old mother of two. Her car, an unreliable Mini Cooper, had broken down on a lonely stretch of the A12 on a foggy November night. Cray's preferred weather. The police report from 1979 was heartbreakingly brief. Her car was found on the hard shoulder, hazard lights dead, the bonnet up. Her purse was on the passenger seat. Her children, then aged 2 and 4, were waiting at her mother's house. Cray hadn't just taken a woman. He had orphaned 2 toddlers. He had stopped to help. The Good Samaritan act again. He had likely offered to drive her to a phone box, or perhaps offered to take a look at the engine. The investigation revealed that Cray was overseeing the widening of a bridge just 3 miles down the road. The bridge became the focal point. But this wasn't a garden. This was tons of reinforced concrete. The team had to use advanced sonic imaging to see inside the pylons without destroying the infrastructure of a major highway. The scan returned an anomaly in the concrete of the western support pillar, a density variation that had the distinct shape of a foreign object. It was a tomb sealed in the most permanent material mankind has created. The extraction was a feat of engineering that rivaled the construction itself. They had to drill a core sample, a delicate biopsy of a bridge, to retrieve DNA. When the results came back as a match for Susan Ash, the narrative of abandonment that had plagued her children for 45 years was shattered. Their mother hadn't left them. She had been stolen while trying to get home to them. The most difficult piece of the puzzle was the gold sleeper, a tiny, generic gold ring that could have belonged to anyone. There was no matching missing persons report that fit the timeline or location suggested by Cray's work logs. A stint in the Midlands in 1984. The victim was a Jane Doe, a ghost without a name. This required the full arsenal of the scientific revolution. The forensic anthropologist took the skull found in a culvert near a defunct railway line, another Cray project, and performed isotope analysis on the teeth. By measuring the ratios of oxygen and strontium isotopes, they could map out where the victim had grown up, what water she drank, and even what her diet was like. The data pointed to the coastal region of North Wales. They cross-referenced this with school records and local truancy reports, not just police files. They found a girl named Ira, meaning snow in Welsh, who had dropped out of the system in 1983. She was a drifter, a traveler, the kind of victim predators like Cray relish because society barely notices when they stop moving. But Cray had kept her earring. He had remembered her. When the facial reconstruction from the skull was broadcast on Welsh regional news, An elderly woman in a care home recognized the eyes. "That's Ira," she whispered to the nurse. She went to find work in the city. The DNA confirmation was a formality. Ira finally had her name back. She was no longer a statistic in a Jane Doe file. She was Ira Jones, aged 18, who loved folk music and wanted to be a seamstress. The sheer scale of the logistical operation to recover these women was unprecedented. It was an industrial exorcism. Construction crews across the UK found themselves working alongside crime scene investigators. Motorways were closed. Public parks were cordoned off. In one instance, the floor of a 1980s shopping center basement was drilled up, revealing a void that Cray had specifically designed into the blueprints as a drainage access, but had used as a grave. The media dubbed it the Cray Map, a dark tourism guide to the infrastructure of Britain. Every time a new site was confirmed, the public felt a fresh wave of revulsion. They drove on these roads, borrowed books from these libraries, and shopped in these centers, unaware that they were walking over the victims of a serial killer. But amidst the horror, there was a profound sense of restoration. The lost victims were being found. The families, many of whom had spent decades in the agonizing limbo of not knowing, were finally given a destination for their grief. Funerals were held in quiet country churches and bustling city crematoriums. Coffins that should have been filled 40 years ago were finally lowered into the ground. The earring map was slowly being dismantled, pin by pin, as each piece of jewelry was returned to the families, not as evidence, but as a memento of the life that was lived before the darkness fell. For the detectives of Operation Yellowstone, the toll was heavy. They were the pallbearers of history. Sarah Jenkins, the lead detective who had cuffed Cray, found herself attending a funeral every other week. She stood at the back, watching the tears and the hugs, feeling the weight of the years. She realized that justice wasn't just about a prison sentence. It was about the restoration of truth. Cray had tried to edit these women out of existence, to reduce them to objects in a box and bones in the concrete. The investigation had written them back in. It was a reclaiming of the narrative. As the final earring, a turquoise stud linked to a 1986 disappearance in Kent, was matched to a set of remains found in a derelict warehouse foundation, the task force prepared to close the physical phase of the operation. The corkboard was empty. The box was empty. The evidence room was full. The lost girls were no longer lost. They were accounted for. They were named. And as the final report was typed up, the silence that fell over the office wasn't one of fatigue, but of a deep, reverent peace. The city had given up its dead. The concrete had confessed. And somewhere, in the ether of memory, the hum of a jazz tune was joined by a chorus of other voices, finally free to drift away into the light. The end of Thomas Cray did not come with the cinematic justice of a hanging or the violent retribution of a prison yard shanking. It came with the quiet, infuriating banality of old age. In the high-security geriatric wing of HMP Belmarsh, a fortress of steel and concrete that sat ironically close to the very river he had once used as a dumping ground, Cray lived out his final 2 years not as a tormented soul seeking redemption, but as a detached observer of his own infamy. He was 84. His joints were stiff. His eyesight was failing, but his mind remained a fortress of rationalization. To the guards, he was inmate A9982, a frail old man who polished his spectacles with a methodical slowness that set their teeth on edge. To the psychologists who lined up to interview him, he was a specimen, a living fossil of the 20th century predator, preserved in the amber of the penal system. He didn't offer them remorse. He offered them critiques. He would look at the photos of his crime scenes and point out the errors in the police work, the inefficiencies in the search grids, speaking with the dry, authoritative tone of a lecturer correcting a student's thesis. But Cray was not idle. In the long, silent stretches of the night, when the prison hummed with the restless energy of the condemned, he was writing. He had petitioned the governor for a notepad and a pen, blue ink, standard issue. under the guise of preparing his legal appeal. But there was no appeal. Cray knew the forensic locks on his cage were unbreakable. Instead, he was constructing his final project. He called it the architecture of silence. It wasn't a confession. Confessions imply guilt, and Cray felt none. It was a memoir, a technical manual, a philosophical treatise on the art of the double life. He wrote about the physics of soil compaction, the acoustics of isolation, and the psychological blind spots of the British public in the 1980s. He wrote about Elena Vance not as a victim, but as a structural anomaly that he had attempted to correct. He wrote about the yellow coat as a beacon of error, a mistaken color theory that had eventually drawn the eye of the law. The existence of the manuscript became a whispered rumor within the prison walls, a dark legend that eventually leaked to the press. The Cray memoirs became the subject of a ferocious ethical battle in the winter of 2025. The families of the victims, united under the banner of the Yellow Coat Foundation, demanded the pages be burned. They argued that the monster shouldn't be allowed to profit, emotionally or historically, from the pain he had caused. They didn't want his voice to echo beyond the grave. They wanted him silenced, erased, just as he had tried to erase their daughters. But the legal system was paralyzed by the complexity of intellectual property rights and the freedom of speech, even for the damned. The manuscript sat in an evidence locker, a stack of handwritten pages that radiated a toxicity all their own. Then, inevitably, came the leak. In the digital age, nothing stays locked away forever. A scan of the first chapter appeared on a dark web forum, then migrated to the fringes of the true crime community. And finally, fragments were quoted in the tabloids. The public reaction was a mixture of revulsion and morbid fascination. Cray's prose was chillingly clinical. He described the act of murder with the same vocabulary he used to describe pouring a foundation. "The city is a living organism," he wrote. "It eats and it excretes. I merely facilitated the digestion. A woman at a bus stop is a temporary variable. A bridge is a permanent constant. I chose the constant." The coldness of his logic was more terrifying than any ranting manifesto. It revealed a mind that didn't just lack empathy. It lacked the very concept of humanity. He viewed people as biological matter, no different from the clay and chalk he had built his career on. The controversy over the memoirs raged, but Cray himself was fading. The machinery of his body, which he had maintained with such discipline for 8 decades, began to fail. On November 14th, 2026, exactly 48 years to the day since he had opened the door of his rover for Elena Vance, Thomas Cray didn't wake up for roll call. The guard found him lying on his back, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. He had died of heart failure in his sleep. There was no struggle, no last words, no moment of terrified realization. He simply stopped. The monster had exited the stage not with a bang, but with a physiological whimper. The news of his death flashed across screens in London. Serial killer Thomas Cray dead at 84. The reaction was not celebration, but a collective exhale of frustration. He had lived a full life. He had enjoyed his retirement. He had smelled the roses in his garden for 40 years, while Elena lay in a box. The scales of justice, even with a life sentence, felt unbalanced. His funeral was a non-event, a bureaucratic disposal. His family, the wife who had stood by him until the arrest, the children who had changed their names and moved to different continents, refused to claim the body. They wanted no part of the final ritual. Thomas Cray was cremated by the state in an indigent service attended only by a prison chaplain and 2 civil servants. There was no eulogy. There was no marker. His ashes were not scattered in a garden or a river. They were disposed of in accordance with municipal regulations for unclaimed remains. The man who had obsessed over the perfect placement of his victims was ultimately discarded without location, his atoms lost in the anonymous gray of the system he had once manipulated. But if Cray thought his architecture of silence would be his legacy, he was wrong. The true legacy of the case was found not in his words, but in the reaction to them. The Vance effect had fundamentally altered the landscape of modern criminology. The Cray case became the definitive case study for the new profiling. In police academies across the UK and beyond, cadets were no longer taught to look just for the social outcast or the loner. They were taught to look for the high-functioning invisibility. They studied Cray's work logs, his integration into the community, his manipulation of authority bias. The Cray profile became shorthand for the suspect who is too normal to be true. The case destroyed the myth of the stranger danger caricature and replaced it with a far more uncomfortable truth. The predator is often the man holding the keys to the city. Furthermore, the scientific revolution that had caught him continued to accelerate, fueled by the public mandate that no case is too cold. The technology used to identify the lost girls, the isotope analysis, the phenotypic reconstruction, the algorithmic genealogy became standard protocol. The Vance protocol funding was renewed permanently, creating a specialized division within the National Crime Agency dedicated solely to historic crimes. The message was clear. There is no statute of limitations on science. If you left a cell, a hair, or a breath in 1980, the 2020s will find you. The era of the unsolved mystery was being dismantled, replaced by the era of the deferred verdict. And what of the memoirs? The leaked pages were eventually analyzed not by fans, but by forensic linguists and psychologists. They didn't publish them as a book. They dissected them as a pathology. They used his words to build better algorithms to catch men like him. His own arrogance became the data set that would trap his successors. The architecture of silence was deconstructed and turned into an alarm system. Cray had tried to write a monument to his own genius. Instead, he had written a suicide note for his own archetype. In the end, the most enduring image of the entire saga wasn't the gray face of the old man in the cell, or the leaked pages of his twisted manifesto. It was the yellow coat. The Yellow Coat Foundation used the funds from the public support to create a scholarship for forensic science students, specifically for those from underprivileged backgrounds in the East End. The coat itself was not displayed in a museum of horrors. It was respectfully destroyed, at the request of the family, burned in a private ceremony, so that it could no longer be an object of curiosity. But the color remained. Every year, on the anniversary of the discovery, the students at St. Jude's Hospital, where Elena had worked, wear a yellow ribbon. It is a small gesture, a flash of brightness against the hospital uniforms. It symbolizes vigilance. It symbolizes memory. The City of London moved on, as cities must. The hole in the ground at Canary Wharf was filled. The luxury tower, the Meridian, was completed. People moved in. They cooked dinner. They watched television. They slept. Most of them didn't know the history of the soil beneath their feet. But sometimes, a resident might pause in the lobby, looking at the brass plaque that had been quietly installed near the entrance. It didn't name the killer. It didn't detail the crime. It simply listed the names of 11 women and the dates they were taken. And below the names, a single line from a jazz song, the one Elena was humming. The fog may hide the street, but the sun always finds the morning. The case of the London 1980 cold case was closed. The file was archived. The detectives retired, but the resonance of the event lingered like the subsonic hum of the city itself. It was a story about the fragility of life, the arrogance of evil, and the relentless, crushing inevitability of the truth. Thomas Cray had tried to bury the past, but he had forgotten the one rule that governs both physics and justice. Energy cannot be destroyed. It can only change form. Elena Vance had changed from a victim into a revolution. And in the contest between the silence of the grave and the noise of the living had finally, definitively won. The sun rises over London in 2026, not with the reluctant, gray pallor of 1980, but with a sharp, high-definition clarity that cuts through the skyline. It glints off the jagged shards of glass that now pierce the clouds, the shard, the gherkin, the endless vertical sprawl of a city that has aggressively reinvented itself. The Thames is no longer a dark artery of industrial waste. It is a tourist ribbon, churning with Uber boats and sightseeing cruisers, the water reflecting the steel and ambition of a metropolis that refuses to sleep. The fog, that heavy, suffocating blanket that once hid the sins of men like Thomas Cray, has largely retreated, chased away by Clean Air Acts and the heat of 10 million lives. But if you know where to look, if you know how to listen to the frequency of the streets, the echoes of the past are still there, vibrating just beneath the asphalt. Stand for a moment on Cambridge Heath Road. It is 7:15 a.m. on a Tuesday. The air smells of roasted coffee from a hipster cafe that used to be a boarded-up newsagent. The street is a cacophony of the modern, the whine of electric buses, the rattle of delivery scooters, the thumping bass of music bleeding from car windows. The bus stop is still there, but it has changed. It is a sleek glass and steel shelter now, equipped with a digital display that counts down the arrival of the number 38 in glowing red LEDs. 3 minutes. 2 minutes. A young woman stands there. She is wearing scrubs, the universal uniform of the healer. She is scrolling on a smartphone, her face illuminated by the blue light of the screen, lost in a digital world that Elena Vance couldn't have conceived of. She checks the time. She is impatient. It is a mundane, everyday tableau. But look closer. Pinned to the lapel of her navy blue tunic is a small, bright yellow ribbon. It is subtle, barely larger than a postage stamp, but against the dark fabric, it sings. This is a recipient of the Vance Scholarship. She doesn't know the full horror of the yellow coat mystery. To her, it is history, a chapter in a textbook, a story her grandmother might have mentioned. But she wears the ribbon. She stands on the same pavement where Elena stood, and when the bus arrives, hissing its hydraulic greeting, she steps on safely. The doors close. The bus pulls away. The cycle continues, but the disruption, the snatching of a life, has been healed. The scar remains, but the wound is closed. Travel east now, following the river towards the Isle of Dogs. The landscape here would be unrecognizable to the ghost of Thomas Cray. The wasteland of rotting wharves and derelict warehouses, where he once parked his rover, is gone. In its place stands the Canary Wharf skyline, a canyon of finance and power. The specific plot of land where the trunk was buried is now the site of the Meridian, a residential tower that spirals 50 stories into the air. In the basement, where the soil was once damp and silent, there is now a state-of-the-art wellness center. A swimming pool glows with turquoise light. Residents swim laps in water that is heated and filtered, completely unaware that they're floating above a former grave. This is not disrespect. It is the ultimate victory of life. Cray wanted this space to be a tomb, a black hole of memory. Instead, it is a place of breath, of movement, of energy. The darkness he planted has been dug out, sterilized, and replaced with light. But in the lobby of the tower, the brass plaque remains. It is polished daily by the concierge. It is not hidden in a corner. It is placed right next to the elevators, forcing every millionaire and banker who lives there to acknowledge it. They glance at the names as they wait for their ride to the penthouse. Elena, Claire, Susan, Ira. The names have become the guardians of the building. They are no longer victims. They are the foundation. The city has absorbed them, not as secrets, but as ancestors. In the offices of the National Crime Agency, the atmosphere is brisk and clinical. Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Jenkins sits at a desk that is devoid of paper. There are no overflowing ashtrays, no towering stacks of manila folders. There are 3 monitors, humming with data. She is looking at a cold hit notification on her screen. A DNA match from a 1992 case in Leeds. The system has done its work. The Vance protocol is running in the background. A silent sentinel that never sleeps. Jenkins picks up the phone. She doesn't have the weary, beaten-down look that George Mason wore in the 80s. She looks sharp, energized, armed. She makes the call to a family that has been waiting for 30 years. "We found him," she says. The words are simple, but they carry the weight of the revolution that started with a single pearl earring. The legacy of the Vance case isn't just in the past. It is in this phone call and the next one and the next. The monster is dead, but the sword he unwittingly forged is sharper than ever. And what of the monster's lair? Drive out of the city, past the M25, into the rolling green hills of the Cotswolds. The cottage where Thomas Cray lived his perfect life is still standing, but it has been cleansed. The murder house label stuck for a while, driving the price down, attracting ghouls and true crime tourists who would stop their cars to stare at the driveway. But eventually, a young couple bought it. They were architects themselves, ironically. They gutted the place. They tore down the false walls in the basement. They dug up the rose garden where he'd hidden his secrets and planted an orchard of apple trees. If you walk past the garden now, you don't smell death. You smell wet earth and blossoming fruit. You hear the sound of children playing, the new owner's kids, running across the lawn where Cray once paced. The energy of the place has been reset. The banality of his evil has been overwritten by the banality of happiness. Cray thought he could imprint himself on the world forever, but he was wrong. He was dust. The laughter of a child in that garden is the most aggressive act of defiance possible. It says, "You are gone. We are here. You matter less than the grass we walk on." Go back to Brick Lane, the heart of the story. The house where Martha Vance waited for 22 years is now a trendy vintage clothing store. The window where she kept her vigil is filled with mannequins wearing retro fashions, perhaps even a yellow coat, hung there without irony. A fashion statement reclaimed from tragedy. The neighborhood is a kaleidoscope of cultures, a riot of curry houses, bagel shops, art galleries, and graffiti. On the side of the building, a street artist has painted a mural. It's not a grim memorial. It's a vibrant Technicolor explosion of jazz instruments, saxophones, trumpets, piano keys swirling in a cloud of musical notes. And in the center, a silhouette of a girl with a nurse's cap, her head thrown back, as if in song. The locals know who it is. The tourists snap photos of it, because it's beautiful. But the meaning transcends the paint. It is the visualization of the hum. The jazz tune that Elena hummed wasn't a death march. It was a sign of life, of a spirit that refused to be flattened by the gray weight of her circumstances. The mural catches the morning sun, the colors blazing against the brick. It is a permanent reminder that while the killer can take the body, he cannot take the melody. The song remains. It bounces off the cobblestones. It weaves through the market stalls. It becomes part of the ambient noise of the East End. And finally, visit the cemetery. It is quiet here. A pocket of green silence in the roaring city. The grave of Martha and Elena Vance is well tended. There are no withered flowers today. There's a fresh bouquet of sunflowers, bright, defiant yellow. A man is standing there. He is old, his hair white, his shoulders stooped. It is Mark, the boyfriend. He is in his late 60s now. He married, had a life, had children of his own, but he still comes here. He isn't crying. The grief has long since calcified into a gentle, dull ache, a part of his anatomy, like an old knee injury. He touches the cold stone. He talks to them, just for a moment. He tells Elena about the new high-speed train. He tells Martha that the neighborhood is safe. He turns to leave, walking down the gravel path. As he reaches the gate, he pauses. A breeze picks up, rustling the leaves of the oak trees, sweeping through the rows of headstones. For a second, just a split second, the wind sounds like a hum, a few notes of a jazz standard. Da-da-da-dum. Mark smiles. It's a sad smile, but it's real. He buttons his coat, not yellow, but a sensible gray, and steps out of the cemetery gates. The camera pulls back now, rising higher and higher. It leaves Mark on the pavement. It leaves the mural on Brick Lane. It leaves the glass tower at Canary Wharf. It rises until the whole of London is spread out below, like a circuit board of gold and shadow. You can see the arteries of the roads, the veins of the rail lines, the pulse of the river. You can see the millions of lives moving, intersecting, loving, losing, waiting. The city is a machine of infinite complexity, capable of hiding the darkest secrets and revealing the brightest truths. The sun clears the horizon completely, flooding the streets with a blinding, undeniable light. The shadows of the buildings stretch long and thin, but they are retreating. The cold case is history. The file is closed. The box is empty. But the light is everywhere. It touches the bus stops and the penthouses, the graves and the gardens. It promises nothing but a new day. And in that light, the story of Elena Vance is no longer a tragedy of the dark. It is a testament to the dawn. The screen fades to black. The hum of the city fades into silence. And then, in the darkness, one final sound. The clear, distinct click of a file being shut. End of script.